Hello horror lovers. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy that spine-chilling sensation before bed, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is very important to me. Like the video, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from. Leave your comment now because you'll probably fall asleep after this story. Your support helps us continue to bring you the best horror stories. Now turn off the lights, lie down, and prepare yourself for a night of nightmares. All because I was in the middle of preparing dinner when my phone rang. The familiar jingle echoed through my small Seattle apartment, but something about it made me pause. Maybe it was the way the sound seemed to reverberate unnaturally, or perhaps it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day at work. Either way, I felt a strange reluctance as I reached for my phone. The caller ID made my heart skip a beat. It was my own number. This has to be a glitch, I muttered, staring at the screen. For a moment I considered ignoring the call, but curiosity got the better of me, and I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I said tentatively. There was a brief pause, filled with static and what sounded like labored breathing. Then, a voice spoke. My voice. "Help me," it pleaded, the words laced with desperation. "Please, you have to help me." I nearly dropped the phone. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It was my voice, unmistakably so, but with an edge of panic I'd never heard from myself before. "Who is this?" I demanded, my own voice shaking. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's you," the voice replied. "It's us. I don't have much time. You need to listen carefully." The line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, as if waiting for more. But there was nothing but silence. Slowly, I lowered the device and stared at it, half expecting it to offer some explanation for what had just happened. "This isn't possible," I whispered to the empty room. I tried to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me, but it clung like a shroud. Attempting to distract myself, I turned back to the stove, where my half-prepared meal awaited. But as I reached for the wooden spoon to stir the sauce, I froze. The spoon wasn't where I'd left it. In fact, nothing on the counter was where it had been just moments ago. The cutting board had moved to the other side, the knife was now by the sink, and the spices were arranged in a completely different order. "What the hell?" I breathed, looking around wildly. My gaze darted around the kitchen, then the living room beyond. Everything seemed slightly off, as if someone had come in and shifted things just enough to notice, but not enough to be immediately obvious. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. Either I was losing my mind, or something truly inexplicable was happening. I needed to get out of the apartment. Grabbing my keys and jacket, I practically ran out the door, not even bothering to turn off the stove. The cool evening air hit me as I emerged onto the street, but it did little to calm my frayed nerves. As I walked briskly down the sidewalk, my mind raced. Should I call someone? But who would believe me? How could I explain a phone call from myself and objects moving on their own without sounding completely insane? Lost in thought, I almost didn't notice when I bumped into someone. "Oh, I'm sorry," I started to say, looking up to see a familiar face. It was my coworker, Mike. "Hey there," he said cheerfully. "Fancy running into you here. Everything okay? You look a bit pale." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? Instead, I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "Just had a weird phone call. It threw me off a bit." Mike nodded sympathetically. "Telemarketers, right? They're getting sneakier these days. Hey, since you're out, want to grab a coffee?" I was just heading to that new place around the corner. Part of me wanted to decline, to run home and hide under the covers, but the larger part, the part that was desperate for some normalcy, nodded. "Sure, that sounds great," I said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. As we walked to the coffee shop, Mike chatted about work and office gossip. I tried to focus on his words, to anchor myself in the mundane details of everyday life. But my mind kept drifting back to that phone call, to my own voice begging for help. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, the rich aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air. We found a small table near the window, and I sank into the chair, grateful for a moment to catch my breath. "So," Mike said after we'd ordered, "want to talk about that weird phone call?" I hesitated, picking at the sleeve of my coffee cup. "It's complicated," I finally said. "You'd probably think I was crazy if I told you." Mike leaned forward, his expression serious. "Try me. I've heard some pretty wild stuff in my time." Taking a deep breath, I decided to take the plunge. "I got a call from my own number," I said quietly. And when I answered, it was my voice on the other end, asking for help. I waited for Mike to laugh, to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he furrowed his brow, looking thoughtful. "That is weird," he admitted. "Did they say anything else?" I shook my head. "The call cut off, but Mike, that's not all. When I got off the phone, things in my apartment had moved. Like really moved. As if someone had come in and rearranged everything in the few seconds I was on the call." Mike's eyes widened. "Okay, that's definitely strange. Are you sure you didn't just forget where you put things? It happens to me all the time." "No, I'm sure," I insisted. It was like reality had shifted somehow. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. It sounded insane, even to my own ears. But to my surprise, Mike didn't immediately dismiss me. "Look," he said, leaning in closer. "I don't know what's going on, but I believe that you believe it. Maybe we should look into this. Could be a prank, or maybe..." He trailed off, leaving the other possibilities unspoken. I felt a rush of relief. Even if Mike didn't fully believe me, at least he was taking me seriously. "Thanks," I said softly. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. "Hey, we all have our moments," Mike said with a grin. "But seriously, if anything else weird happens, call me, okay? Day or night." I nodded, feeling a bit more grounded. As we finished our coffee and parted ways, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Fear of what might be happening, gratitude for Mike's support, and an underlying current of determination to get to the bottom of this mystery. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever had happened with that phone call, whatever force had rearranged my belongings, I had a sinking feeling it wasn't done with me yet. Reaching my door, I took a deep breath before entering. The apartment looked normal at first glance, but as I moved through the rooms, I noticed more subtle changes. A book on the coffee table that I didn't remember leaving out. A chair slightly askew. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed off somehow, as if it was a fraction of a second behind my movements. I stood there staring at my reflection, trying to make sense of it all. As I watched, my reflection's lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I leaned closer, straining to understand. "Help me," my reflection mouthed, eyes wide with fear. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. This was real. This was happening, and I had no idea how to stop it. As I sank to the floor, my back against the cool tile of the bathroom wall, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. Whatever normal had been before, it was gone now. I was stepping into something unknown, something that defied explanation. And somewhere, in some other time or place or reality, another version of me was calling out for help. I just had to figure out how to answer. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in my bones. I hadn't slept well, my dreams plagued by echoes of my own voice calling for help. As I stumbled out of bed, I tried to shake off the lingering unease from the previous day's events. "Just a normal day," I muttered to myself, a mantra I hoped would somehow make it true. "Everything's fine." I went through my morning routine on autopilot, desperately clinging to the familiar. It wasn't until I was halfway to work that the first ripple of strangeness hit me. I was waiting at a crosswalk when a red sports car came speeding around the corner. Time seemed to slow as I watched it careen towards a woman stepping off the curb. My heart leapt into my throat, a scream building. And then it was over. The car screeched to a halt. The woman stumbled back, shaken but unharmed. People around me muttered and shook their heads at the reckless driver. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen this before, experienced this exact moment. The way the sunlight glinted off the car's hood, the pattern of the woman's floral dress fluttering in the breeze. It was all eerily familiar. "Are you okay?" a voice beside me asked. I turned to see an elderly man peering at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just a bit of déjà vu, I guess." The man nodded sagely. "Ah, yes. The mind plays tricks sometimes. Best not to dwell on it." As I continued my walk to work, his words echoed in my mind. Was that all this was? My mind playing tricks? But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The phone call, the moving objects, and now this. It all felt connected, part of some larger mystery I couldn't yet comprehend. I arrived at the office, determined to lose myself in the mundane tasks of the day. For a few hours, it seemed to work. I answered emails, attended a mind-numbing meeting about quarterly projections, and even managed to joke with coworkers over lunch. But as I was heading back to my desk, the world around me began to blur. My vision swam, and I felt a tugging sensation, as if I was being pulled by an invisible force. I blinked, and suddenly I was no longer in the office. I found myself standing on a busy street corner, the smell of coffee and pastries wafting from a nearby cafe. Disoriented, I spun around, trying to get my bearings. This was downtown, at least 5 miles from my office. How had I gotten here? "Miss, are you all right?" A concerned barista had stepped out of the cafe, a frown creasing her forehead. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain this? I'm not sure, I finally managed. "I don't know how I got here." The barista's frown deepened. "Do you need me to call someone for you? The hospital, maybe?" I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. No, I'm fine. I need to get back to work." Before she could respond, I turned and hurried away, my mind racing. What was happening to me? How had I traveled across the city in the blink of an eye? And more importantly, how was I going to get back without anyone noticing I'd been gone? As I walked, trying to formulate a plan, I noticed subtle differences in my surroundings. Shop signs that I could have sworn were different colors, trees that seemed older or younger than they should be. It was as if I had stepped into a slightly altered version of Seattle. I ducked into an alley, needing a moment to collect myself. Leaning against the cool brick wall, I closed my eyes and took several deep breaths. When I opened them again, I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man stood at the entrance of the alley, watching me intently. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. There was something familiar about him, though I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. "It's starting, isn't it?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The shifts, the déjà vu, the calls from yourself." I pushed off the wall, my heart pounding. "Who are you? How do you know about that?" He took a step closer, his expression a mix of sympathy and urgency. "I'm Dr. Alan Reeves, and I know because I've been through it too. We don't have much time. They'll be coming for you soon." "Who? Who's coming for me?" I demanded, fear and confusion warring within me. Dr. Reeves glanced over his shoulder nervously. "The people behind the experiment, the ones who created the temporal loops. Listen carefully." But before he could continue, a black van screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. Men in dark suits poured out, heading straight for us. "Run!" Dr. Reeves shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me deeper into the alley. We raced through a maze of back streets and service entrances, the sound of pursuit never far behind. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but fear kept me going. Finally, we ducked into a dilapidated building, climbing several flights of stairs before emerging onto the roof. "What now?" I gasped, looking around frantically for an escape route. Dr. Reeves pointed to an adjacent building. "We jump. It's the only way." I looked at him like he was insane. "Are you crazy? We'll never make it." He gripped my shoulders, his blue eyes intense. "Listen to me. What you're experiencing, it's not just in your head. You're caught in a temporal anomaly. The laws of physics don't always apply. You have to trust me." The sound of footsteps thundering up the stairs spurred me to action. With a nod, I backed up, then ran full tilt towards the edge of the roof. As I leapt, time seemed to slow. I hung in the air far longer than should have been possible, sailing across the gap between buildings with ease. I landed on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. Dr. Reeves landed beside me a moment later. Without pausing to catch our breath, we were off again, weaving through the city in a desperate attempt to lose our pursuers. Finally, after what felt like hours, we slowed to a stop in a quiet residential neighborhood. Dr. Reeves ushered me into a nondescript house, quickly locking the door behind us. "We should be safe here for now," he said, moving to peer out the windows. "It's a temporal blind spot. They won't be able to track us easily." I sank onto a worn couch, my head spinning with questions. "Dr. Reeves, please, what's going on? Who were those men? And what did you mean about temporal anomalies?" He sighed heavily, taking a seat across from me. "It's a long story, and you might not believe all of it, but I'll try to explain. About 5 years ago, a secret government project began experimenting with time manipulation. They were trying to create controlled temporal loops, hoping to use them for everything from espionage to preventing disasters. But something went wrong, I guessed." Dr. Reeves nodded grimly. "Very wrong. The loops became unstable, affecting people and places randomly. Some, like you and me, became temporally sensitive, able to perceive the shifts and even move between realities." I shook my head, trying to process this information. "But why me? Why now?" "That I'm not sure of," he admitted. "But I do know that you're important. The fact that you received a call from yourself, it suggests you might be key to unraveling this whole mess." As I sat there, trying to come to terms with this new reality, a thought struck me. "My apartment," I said suddenly. "Yesterday things moved on their own. Was that—" "A temporal shift, yes," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "Your consciousness moved slightly out of sync with this reality. What you saw was a glimpse of a different version of your apartment." I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed. When I looked up again, Dr. Reeves was watching me with a mix of sympathy and determination. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said gently. "But we don't have the luxury of time. Those men will keep looking for us, and the temporal anomalies will only get worse. We need to figure out how to stop this, and I think you're the key." As I met his gaze, I felt a strange sense of resolve settling over me. Whatever was happening, whatever role I had to play in all this, I knew I couldn't run from it. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Where do we start?" Dr. Reeves smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "We start by finding out why you, of all people, received that call. And then we use that knowledge to unravel the very fabric of time itself." As night fell outside, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. The normal world I knew was gone, replaced by one of temporal shifts and shadowy government agencies. But as terrifying as it was, a part of me thrilled at the challenge ahead. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. Little did I know the journey ahead would test me in ways I could never have imagined, pushing me to the very limits of what I thought was possible, and beyond. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the windows when I jolted awake, momentarily disoriented by my unfamiliar surroundings. It took a few seconds for the events of the previous day to come rushing back. The temporal shift, the chase, and Dr. Reeves's revelations about the nature of my predicament. I found the doctor in the small kitchen, hunched over a laptop and surrounded by stacks of papers covered in complex equations and diagrams. "Good morning," he said without looking up. "I hope you managed to get some rest. We have a lot of work ahead of us." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter, its bitter aroma a comforting constant in this sea of uncertainty. "So, where do we start?" I asked, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. Dr. Reeves finally looked up, his blue eyes sharp despite the obvious lack of sleep. "We need to understand why you're at the center of this temporal anomaly. The phone call you received from yourself, that's our key. We need to trace its origin." I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "And how exactly do we do that?" "First," he said, pushing away from the table, "we need to establish a baseline. I need you to recount everything that's happened to you, every detail you can remember, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem." For the next hour, I talked. I described the initial phone call, the moving objects in my apartment, the car accident I witnessed, and the disorienting shift that had brought me downtown. Dr. Reeves listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking for clarification. As I finished recounting the events, a thought struck me. "Dr. Reeves, I should call my parents. They must be worried sick by now." A shadow passed over his face. "I'm afraid that's not a good idea. Any communication could potentially be traced. Besides..." He hesitated, as if unsure how to proceed. "Besides what?" I pressed, a knot forming in my stomach. He sighed heavily. "I tried to warn you earlier, but we got interrupted. The temporal shifts aren't just affecting your perception of reality, they're altering reality itself. Your parents, in this current timeline, they might not remember the conversation you think you had with them yesterday." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. "Are you saying my parents might not even know who I am?" "It's possible," he admitted. "The changes could be subtle or drastic. We won't know until we interact with them. But for now, it's safer to assume that the world outside this house is not the one you remember." I slumped into a chair, my mind reeling. The enormity of the situation was finally sinking in. Not only was I being hunted by shadowy government agents, but the very fabric of my reality was unraveling around me. Dr. Reeves placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I know it's overwhelming, but we can fix this. We just need to stay focused." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Okay, what's our next move?" "We need to dig deeper into the nature of these temporal anomalies," he said, moving back to his laptop. "I've been developing a theory about the structure of time itself. If I'm right, there might be a way to stabilize the loops and prevent further damage to the timeline." As Dr. Reeves launched into an explanation of his theory, filled with terms like quantum entanglement and temporal resonance, I found my attention wandering. My gaze drifted to the window where I noticed a figure standing across the street, watching the house. "Dr. Reeves," I interrupted, my voice hushed. "I think we're being watched." He was at my side in an instant, peering cautiously through the blinds. "We've been compromised," he muttered. "We need to move. Now." We quickly gathered what we could, his laptop, some of the research papers, and a small bag of supplies he had prepared for just such an eventuality. As we slipped out the back door, I could hear the sound of car doors slamming in the front. We ran through backyards and alleyways, the sounds of pursuit never far behind. Just as I thought we couldn't go any further, Dr. Reeves pulled me into what looked like an abandoned warehouse. "Quick, in here," he said, ushering me towards a strange-looking device in the center of the room. It resembled a large metal arch with various wires and components attached to it. "What is that thing?" I asked, breathless from our escape. "It's a temporal stabilizer," he explained hurriedly, powering up the machine. "I built it as a failsafe. It should create a localized field that will protect us from further shifts." As the device hummed to life, the air around us seemed to shimmer and distort. Outside, I could hear voices shouting, growing closer. "Dr. Reeves, they're almost here," I warned, panic rising in my throat. "Just a few more seconds," he muttered, fingers flying over a control panel. Suddenly, the world around us seemed to freeze. The shouts outside stopped mid-syllable, and a pigeon I could see through a broken window hung motionless in the air. What just happened?" I asked, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the silence. Dr. Reeves smiled grimly. "We've created a temporal bubble. Time outside this field is moving incredibly slowly compared to us. We should be safe here, at least for a while." As the initial shock wore off, questions began flooding my mind. How is this possible? How long can we stay here, and what happens when we leave? One question at a time. He chuckled, though the sound was strained. The how is complicated, but essentially we're exploiting a quirk in the nature of time itself. As for how long we can stay, that's trickier. The field will eventually collapse, and when it does, we'll be reintegrated into the normal time stream. I nodded, trying to wrap my head around the concept. And when that happens? "We'll have to be ready," he said seriously. "This gives us a chance to plan our next move, but it's not a permanent solution." As Dr. Reeves began setting up his equipment, I wandered the perimeter of our temporal bubble, marveling at the frozen world just beyond its edge. It was like being inside a photograph, every detail perfectly preserved in a single moment of time. "So," I said, turning back to the doctor, "you mentioned a theory about the structure of time. Care to elaborate while we're stuck here?" He looked up from his work, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "It's fascinating, really. We've always thought of time as a linear progression, but it's much more complex than that. Imagine time as a vast, multi-dimensional tapestry. What we're experiencing, these temporal anomalies, they're like snags in the fabric." "And the phone call I received?" I prompted. "That's where it gets really interesting," he said, warming to his subject. "I believe you've become a sort of temporal anchor point. Somehow you're able to connect across different threads of the tapestry. That call you received? It might have been from a version of you in a different timeline altogether." The implications made my head spin. "So there are multiple versions of me out there, all experiencing different realities?" Dr. Reeves nodded. "Potentially infinite versions. And somehow, you're at the center of it all. That's why those agents are after you. If they can understand and control your connection to these other timelines, they could reshape reality itself." A chill ran down my spine at the thought. "How do we stop them?" "We need to find the source of the original temporal experiment," he said, his expression turning grave. "If we can shut it down at its point of origin, we might be able to stabilize all the timelines and end this chaos." As I pondered this, a strange sensation washed over me. The edges of my vision began to blur, and I felt a tugging sensation, as if something was trying to pull me away. "Dr. Reeves," I called out, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Something's happening." He rushed to my side, concern etched on his face. "The temporal shifts, they're getting stronger. Even this field can't fully protect you. Focus on my voice. Try to anchor yourself here." I struggled to concentrate, but the pulling sensation intensified. The warehouse around me began to fade, replaced by fleeting images of other places, other times. I caught glimpses of myself in various situations, some familiar, others completely foreign. Just as I thought I would be torn away completely, Dr. Reeves's voice cut through the chaos. "Remember why we're here. Remember the call. Focus on that moment." With a tremendous effort, I latched onto the memory of that first, impossible phone call. Slowly, the swirling vision subsided, and I found myself back in the warehouse, gasping for breath. Dr. Reeves steadied me as I swayed on my feet. "That was too close," he muttered. "The anomalies are getting worse. We're running out of time." As I regained my composure, I realized something had changed. There was a new certainty in my mind, a piece of information that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Reeves," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I know where we need to go. I saw it during the shift. The place where all of this started." His eyes widened. You're sure? I nodded, the image clear in my mind. It's a facility, hidden in the mountains. That's where the original experiment took place, and that's where we'll find our answers. As the temporal field around us began to flicker, signaling its imminent collapse, Dr. Reeves and I shared a look of determination. We had a destination now, a clear goal. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever twists and turns our journey might take, we were one step closer to unraveling the mystery that had upended our lives. The world outside our bubble began to move again, time resuming its normal flow. As we prepared to face whatever awaited us beyond the warehouse walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something much bigger than either of us could imagine. The fate of not just our reality, but countless others hung in the balance. And somehow, improbably, I was the key to it all. As the temporal field collapsed around us, the sounds of the outside world came rushing back like a tidal wave. Shouts and footsteps echoed through the warehouse, growing louder by the second. "We need to move now," Dr. Reeves hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards a rusted fire escape. We burst through the door just as our pursuers entered the main floor of the warehouse. The cool night air hit my face as we clambered down the metal stairs, our footsteps clanging loudly in the darkness. "This way," I whispered, an inexplicable certainty guiding me. We darted down an alley, weaving through the maze-like backstreets of the city. After what felt like hours of running and hiding, we finally slowed our pace, confident we had lost our tail for the moment. We found ourselves in a dimly lit park, the trees offering some cover from prying eyes. Catching our breath on a secluded bench, Dr. Reeves turned to me. "That was too close. They're getting better at tracking us through the temporal shifts." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Dr. Reeves, when I had that vision or whatever it was, I saw more than just the facility. I saw faces, heard snippets of conversation. It's like I was tapping into multiple timelines at once." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What exactly did you see? Every detail could be crucial." I closed my eyes, trying to recall the flood of images and sensations. There was a woman, a scientist, I think. She was arguing with someone about the ethics of the experiment, and I saw myself, but different versions. In one, I was working at the facility. In another, I was running from it. Dr. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. "It seems your connection to these other timelines is growing stronger. This could be both a blessing and a curse. It might give us the information we need, but it also makes you more detectable to those hunting us." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "So what do we do now? How do we get to this facility in the mountains?" He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We'll need transportation, supplies, and most importantly, a way to avoid detection. I have an old colleague who might be able to help us, but reaching out to her is risky." "Do we have a choice?" I asked. "I suppose not," he admitted. "All right, there's a payphone a few blocks from here. We'll use that to make the call. It's not completely safe, but it's better than using our own phones." As we made our way to the payphone, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every passing car a possible pursuer. Dr. Reeves dialed a number from memory, his fingers tapping nervously on the phone booth as it rang. Finally, someone picked up. "Sarah, it's Alan," he said, his voice low. "I know it's been a while, but I need your help. It's about the project." He paused, listening. "Yes, that project. We need to meet. The usual place, in an hour." As he hung up, I raised an eyebrow. "The usual place?" He gave a wry smile. "Sarah and I have a history of, let's say, unconventional research. We have a few pre-arranged meeting spots for emergencies. We made our way across town, staying in the shadows as much as possible. The usual place turned out to be an all-night diner on the outskirts of the city. As we entered, the bell above the door jingled, causing me to jump. A middle-aged waitress looked up from behind the counter. "Sit anywhere you like, honey. I'll be with you in a minute." We slid into a booth near the back, positioning ourselves to keep an eye on both the entrance and the kitchen door. Dr. Reeves ordered coffee for both of us when the waitress came over. As we waited, I found myself studying the other patrons. A truck driver hunched over a plate of eggs at the counter. An elderly couple sharing a slice of pie in the corner. Were they who they appeared to be, or potential threats in disguise? My paranoid musings were interrupted by the arrival of a woman who could only be Sarah. She was tall and lean, with sharp features and piercing green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Without a word, she slid into the booth across from us. "Alan," she said, her voice cool. "It's been a while, and you must be the temporal anomaly I've been hearing so much about." Her gaze fixed on me, making me feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Sarah," Dr. Reeves nodded. "Thank you for coming. We need your help." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "I gathered as much. What I want to know is why I should risk everything I've built to help you. The agency isn't exactly known for its forgiveness." Dr. Reeves leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Because this is bigger than any of us, Sarah. The temporal anomalies are getting worse. If we don't stop it, the fabric of reality itself could unravel." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "And you think you can fix it? Just the two of you against the entire agency?" "Three of us," I interjected, surprising myself with my boldness. "If you help us." She turned her scrutinizing gaze on me. "And what makes you so special? Why are you at the center of all this?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm not sure, but I can see things, other timelines, other versions of reality. And I know where we need to go to stop this." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "You've seen the facility." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "In the mountains. It's where it all started." She was quiet for a long moment, seemingly lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. "All right, I'll help you. But you need to understand what you're up against. The agency has resources beyond your wildest imagination, and they'll stop at nothing to control the temporal anomalies. We know the risks," Dr. Reeves said solemnly. "But we have to try." Sarah nodded. "Very well. I can provide you with transportation and some basic supplies. But getting into the facility, that's on you." As Sarah outlined her plan to get us to the mountains, I found my attention drawn to the window. A black van had pulled up across the street, and men in suits were getting out. "Dr. Reeves," I whispered urgently, nodding towards the window. He followed my gaze, his face paling. "We've been compromised. We need to move. Now." Sarah was on her feet in an instant. "Follow me. There's a back exit through the kitchen." We rushed through the swinging doors, startling the cook. Sarah led us through a maze of stainless steel appliances and out a rear door into an alley. "My car's just around the corner," she said, breaking into a run. We had almost reached the vehicle when a shout rang out behind us. "Stop right there!" I risked a glance back to see two men in suits gaining on us, guns drawn. "Get down!" Sarah yelled, pulling something from her jacket. I hit the ground just as a deafening bang filled the air. When I looked up, I saw a cloud of smoke filling the alley. Sarah was pulling me to my feet, urging me towards a sleek black car. We piled in, Sarah gunning the engine before the doors were even fully closed. As we peeled out of the alley, I could hear frustrated shouts and the sound of gunfire behind us. "Smoke grenade," Sarah explained as she expertly weaved through traffic. "Should buy us some time, but they'll be on our tail soon enough." Dr. Reeves twisted in his seat to look behind us. "How did they find us so quickly?" Sarah's expression was grim. "They must have some way of tracking the temporal anomalies. Which means," she glanced at me in the rearview mirror, "you're like a beacon to them." The implications of her words sank in. As long as I was experiencing these visions and shifts, we'd never truly be safe. As if on cue, the world around me began to blur. I felt the now familiar tugging sensation, stronger than ever before. "It's happening again," I managed to gasp out before the car interior faded away. I found myself standing in a sterile white room, surrounded by complex machinery. A woman in a lab coat, the same one I had seen in my previous vision, was arguing heatedly with a man in a suit. "This is madness, Director," she was saying. "We can't control it. The temporal fractures are spreading faster than we can contain them." The man, the director, shook his head. "We're too close to give up now, Dr. Chen. Think of the possibilities if we can harness this power." "At what cost?" Dr. Chen demanded. "We're tearing apart the very fabric of reality." The scene shifted, and I was suddenly back in Sarah's car, gasping for breath. "What did you see?" Dr. Reeves asked urgently. I recounted the vision as quickly as I could. Sarah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Dr. Chen," she murmured. "I knew her. She was one of the lead scientists on the project before it all went wrong." "We need to find her," I said, a certainty I couldn't explain filling me. "She's the key to all of this." As we sped towards the mountains and the hidden facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against more than just our pursuers. Time itself seemed to be unraveling around us, and I was somehow at the center of it all. The weight of our mission pressed down on me. Find Dr. Chen. Stop the experiment. Save reality itself. It seemed an impossible task. But as I looked at Dr. Reeves's determined face and Sarah's steady hands on the wheel, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever twists and turns our journey might take, we were in this together. And somehow, against all odds, we had to succeed. The fate of not just our reality, but countless others, depended on it. The winding mountain road stretched before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dense forest. Sarah's car hugged each curve with precision, eating up the miles as we ascended higher into the wilderness. The first pale light of dawn was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Dr. Reeves sat in the passenger seat, poring over a map he'd produced from his bag. "According to the coordinates you saw in your vision," he said, turning to look at me in the back seat, "the facility should be just over the next ridge." I nodded, my stomach a knot of anxiety and anticipation. The visions had been coming more frequently now, flashes of other timelines bleeding into our reality. It was getting harder to distinguish between what was real and what was just a temporal echo. "How are we going to get in?" I asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at me for hours. "I doubt they'll just let us walk through the front door." Sarah's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a hint of a smirk on her lips. "Leave that to me. I didn't spend years working for the agency without picking up a few tricks." As we crested the ridge, a vast complex came into view. Nestled in a valley between two peaks, it looked more like a small city than a research facility. High concrete walls surrounded a cluster of buildings with a single road leading to a heavily guarded gate. Sarah pulled the car off the main road, concealing it behind a stand of trees. "We'll have to go the rest of the way on foot," she said, popping the trunk. "Less chance of being detected." We gathered our supplies, backpacks filled with food, water, and various pieces of equipment I couldn't even begin to identify. Sarah handed each of us a small earpiece. "Short-range communicators," she explained. "They should work even if they try to jam normal radio frequencies." As we made our way through the thick underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me jump. "Relax," Dr. Reeves said softly, noticing my tension. "We're still well outside their perimeter." But even as he spoke, I felt the familiar tugging sensation of an impending temporal shift. "Not again," I muttered, bracing myself against a tree. The forest around me blurred and faded, replaced by the sterile interior of the facility. I saw Dr. Chen again, this time frantically typing at a computer terminal. "We have to shut it down," she was saying to someone off-screen. "The fractures are spreading too quickly. If we don't stop it now, there won't be anything left to save." A man's voice responded, cold and commanding. "That's not your decision to make, Doctor. The potential benefits far outweigh the risks." You don't understand, Dr. Chen pleaded. It's not just our reality at stake. We're affecting countless parallel timelines. The damage could be... The vision cut off abruptly as I felt a hand on my shoulder, shaking me back to the present. What did you see? Sarah asked, her eyes scanning the forest around us warily. I quickly recounted the vision, watching as Dr. Reeves's and Sarah's expressions grew more grave with each word. It's worse than we thought, Dr. Reeves muttered. They're not just experimenting with time travel. They're punching holes in the very fabric of reality. Sarah nodded grimly. All the more reason to shut this operation down. Come on. We're almost at the perimeter. As we approached the facility's outer wall, Sarah held up a hand, signaling us to stop. She pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a radar gun. Security scanner, she explained in a whisper. It'll tell us where their blind spots are. After a few tense minutes of sweeping the area, Sarah pointed to a section of the wall about 50 yards to our right. There, the sensor coverage is weakest there. We made our way to the spot, staying low and using the vegetation for cover. When we reached the wall, Sarah produced what looked like high-tech suction cups from her pack. Gecko grips, she said with a hint of pride. They'll let us scale the wall without leaving any trace. One by one, we climbed the concrete barrier, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give us away. As we dropped down on the other side, alarms suddenly blared to life. "Run!" Sarah shouted, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We sprinted across an open courtyard heading for the nearest building. Guards shouted behind us and I heard the sharp crack of gunfire. "In here!" Dr. Reeves called, yanking open a door. We tumbled inside, finding ourselves in what looked like a maintenance corridor. Sarah quickly jammed the lock behind us. "That won't hold them for long," she panted. "We need to find the main research lab. That's where they'll be controlling the temporal experiments." As if on cue, another vision hit me. This time, instead of seeing Dr. Chen, I saw myself. Or rather, another version of myself. She was wearing a lab coat, striding purposefully down a corridor identical to the one we were in. "This way," I said as the vision faded, pointing down the hallway. I think I know where to go." Dr. Reeves and Sarah exchanged a look but followed without question. We navigated the maze-like interior of the facility, guided by flashes of insight from my temporal double. Finally, we reached a set of heavy double doors marked Temporal Research Lab, authorized personnel only. "This is it," I said, my hand hovering over the access panel. Sarah gently pushed me aside. "Allow me," she said, pulling out a small device and attaching it to the panel. After a few seconds, the light turned green, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. We entered a vast room filled with banks of computers and strange, pulsing machines. In the center stood a massive apparatus that seemed to bend the light around it, making my eyes water just looking at it. And there, hunched over a control panel, was Dr. Chen. She looked up as we entered, her eyes widening in shock. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" Before we could answer, alarms blared again, and a voice boomed over the intercom. "Intruder alert. All security personnel to the Temporal Research Lab immediately." Dr. Chen's gaze darted between us and the door, indecision clear on her face. "Dr. Chen," I said, stepping forward, "we're here to help. We know about the temporal fractures, the damage they're causing. We need to shut this down before it's too late." Her eyes narrowed. "How could you possibly know about that?" Quickly, I explained about my visions, the calls from other timelines, and our journey to reach the facility. As I spoke, I could see the doubt in her eyes slowly give way to hope. "I knew it," she breathed. "I theorized that the fractures might create a nexus point, someone who could perceive multiple timelines. But I never imagined..." Her words were cut off by the sound of pounding on the lab doors. "Open up. This is security." Dr. Chen's expression hardened with resolve. "You're right. We need to shut it down. But it's not that simple. The temporal core has become unstable. If we just turn it off, it could cause a catastrophic collapse of all connected timelines. So what do we do? Dr. Reeves asked, his voice urgent. Dr. Chen turned to the central apparatus. We need to initiate a controlled implosion. It will seal the fractures and stabilize the timelines, but... She hesitated, looking at me. It will require someone to act as a focal point, someone connected to multiple timelines. The implication hung heavy in the air. I swallowed hard, understanding what she was asking. Me. It has to be me. Sarah stepped forward, her face a mask of determination. There has to be another way. We didn't come all this way just to... But I cut her off, a strange calm settling over me. No, it's okay. I think this is why I've been experiencing these visions. It's what I'm meant to do. The pounding on the door grew louder, the metal beginning to buckle under the assault. We don't have much time, Dr. Chen said, her fingers flying over the control panel. Are you sure about this? I nodded, stepping towards the temporal core. As I approached, I could feel the pull of countless timelines, all converging on this single point in space and time. Dr. Reeves gripped my shoulder, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and sorrow. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he said softly. Sarah simply nodded, words seemingly beyond her. As I stepped into the core, the world around me began to blur and shift. I could see flashes of other realities, other versions of myself, all flowing together like streams joining a mighty river. Dr. Chen's voice sounded distant as she began the shutdown sequence. Initiating temporal implosion in 3, 2, 1. The last thing I saw before the light engulfed me was the lab doors bursting open, security forces flooding in. Then everything went white. In that moment of blinding radiance, I felt connected to every version of myself across every timeline. I saw the paths not taken, the lives I might have lived. And I understood that in sacrificing this one life, I was saving countless others. As the light faded and the roar of collapsing timelines filled my ears, I felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, I knew I had made the right choice. The world around me dissolved into a kaleidoscope of possibilities, and I let myself fall into the embrace of the unknown. Consciousness returned slowly, like wading through a thick fog. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights above me. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then, in a rush, it all came back. The facility, Dr. Chen, the temporal implosion. I sat up abruptly, my head spinning. I was in what looked like a hospital room, but something felt off. The walls seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they weren't quite solid. Easy there, a familiar voice said. Dr. Reeves appeared at my bedside, concern etched on his face. You've been through quite an ordeal. Did it work? I croaked, my throat dry. The implosion. Did we stop it? Dr. Reeves smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. Yes and no, the fractures have been sealed, but, well, things aren't quite back to normal. Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened and Sarah walked in, followed by Dr. Chen. They both looked relieved to see me awake, but there was a tension in their postures that set me on edge. How are you feeling? Dr. Chen asked, picking up a chart from the foot of my bed. Confused, I admitted. What happened? The last thing I remember is stepping into the temporal core. The three of them exchanged glances, having a silent conversation. Finally, Sarah spoke up. You did it. You stabilized the timelines. But in doing so, you've become something else. What do you mean, something else? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. When you entered the core, you didn't just seal the fractures. You became a living bridge between timelines. You exist in all of them simultaneously. I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. So, I'm everywhere at once? In a manner of speaking, Dr. Reeves said. Your consciousness seems to be able to shift between different versions of reality at will. But it's not just that. You're changing things simply by observing them. As if to emphasize his point, the wall behind him rippled, briefly showing a different room before settling back to its original appearance. That's impossible, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it was true. I could feel the different realities brushing against my mind, waiting to be explored. Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We've been monitoring you for the past week. Every time you dream, reality shifts, sometimes in small ways, sometimes dramatically. A week? I gasped. I've been out for a week? Dr. Chen nodded. Your mind needed time to adjust to its new state of being. We weren't sure you'd wake up at all. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, determined to stand. As my feet touched the floor, the room spun, and suddenly I was no longer in the hospital room. I found myself standing in a bustling city square, but it was like no city I'd ever seen. Gleaming spires of crystal and metal stretched into the sky, while vehicles that looked more like bubbles of light zipped between them. "Hello there," a voice said beside me. I turned to see myself, but not quite. This version of me was older, with streaks of gray in her hair and laughter lines around her eyes. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice shaky. My older self smiled. "You're in one of the many possible futures, one where humanity embraced the technology unlocked by the temporal experiments." Before I could ask more, the scene shifted again. Now I was in a war-torn landscape, smoke and ash filling the air. Another version of myself, this one scarred and battle-worn, crouched beside me. "And this," she said grimly, "is what happens if the wrong people get control of time itself." I blinked, and I was back in the hospital room gasping for breath. Dr. Reeves was holding me steady, concern written all over his face. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. I described the visions, watching as the other's expressions grew more serious with each word. "It's as we feared," Dr. Chen murmured. "You're not just observing other timelines, you're interacting with them, perhaps even influencing them." "But I don't want this power," I protested. "Can't we just undo it?" Sarah shook her head. "It doesn't work like that. You're the linchpin now, holding the timelines in balance. If we tried to remove you from the equation, everything could unravel." Dr. Reeves finished. I slumped back onto the bed, the weight of this new reality crushing down on me. "So what do we do now?" Dr. Chen sat down beside me, her voice gentle but firm. "We learn, we explore, we try to understand the full extent of what you can do and how to control it. And we keep you safe," Sarah added. "There are people out there who would kill to have your abilities, or worse, try to exploit them." As if summoned by her words, an alarm began to blare. Red lights flashed in the hallway outside. "Speaking of which," Dr. Reeves muttered, moving to the door, "we need to move now." "What's happening?" I asked, scrambling to my feet. "The agency," Sarah spat. "They must have tracked us here." Dr. Chen was already grabbing equipment, shoving it into a bag. "We have a safe house prepared. If we can get there, we should be able to—" Her words were cut off by an explosion that rocked the building. The door burst open, and armed men in black tactical gear poured in. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" Time seemed to slow down. I could see the fear on my companions' faces, the determination in the eyes of our attackers. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. I reached out, not with my hands, but with my mind. I could feel the threads of reality, pliable under my will. With a thought, I tugged. The world blurred, and suddenly we were no longer in the hospital room. We were standing in a forest clearing, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves replacing the chaos of moments before. Dr. Reeves, Sarah, and Dr. Chen looked around in shock. What did you do?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of awe and fear. I stared at my hands, feeling the power thrumming through me. I'm not sure. I just wished us somewhere safe, and it happened. Dr. Chen was the first to recover, her scientific mind already racing. Incredible. You didn't just move us through space. You shifted us to an entirely different timeline, one where we were never at that hospital. Is that safe? Dr. Reeves asked cautiously. I shrugged, feeling oddly calm despite the enormity of what I'd just done. I don't know, but it felt right, like this is where we're supposed to be. As the initial shock wore off, I could see the others beginning to process our new situation. Sarah was already scouting the perimeter of the clearing, her training kicking in. Dr. Reeves and Dr. Chen were excitedly discussing the implications of my new abilities. But beneath their voices, I could hear something else. Whispers from other timelines, fragments of possibilities brushing against my consciousness. I closed my eyes, letting the murmur of infinite realities wash over me. When I opened them again, I felt a new sense of purpose. We can't just hide, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever this power is, whatever I've become, we need to understand it, and we need to make sure it's used for good. The others fell silent, turning to look at me. What are you suggesting? Dr. Reeves asked cautiously. I took a deep breath, the weight of countless futures resting on my next words. I think we need to go back. Back to where it all started. We need to find out why I was chosen for this, and what it means for the future. For all possible futures. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want to break into the facility again? After we just barely escaped? I shook my head. Not break in. We're going to walk in the front door. Because this time, we have something they want. I gestured to myself. Me. Dr. Chen looked thoughtful. It's risky, but you're right. If we're going to understand this, we need access to their research, their equipment. And we need to make sure they don't abuse this power, Dr. Reeves added. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. Exactly. We're not running anymore. We're taking control of the narrative. As my companions began to plan our next move, I gazed up at the sky, marveling at how blue it was in this reality. I could feel the weight of infinite possibilities stretching out before me, each decision branching into countless futures. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. The story of time itself was about to be rewritten. And somehow, improbably, I was holding the pen. The facility loomed before us, a monolithic structure of steel and concrete that seemed to defy the natural beauty of the surrounding mountains. We stood at the edge of the tree line, the morning mist still clinging to the ground around our feet. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her hand resting on the holster at her hip. Once we go in, there's no turning back. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I'm sure. It's time we face this head on. Dr. Reeves adjusted his glasses, peering at the distant guard towers. Remember, we're not here as enemies. We're here to negotiate. Assuming they give us the chance, Dr. Chen muttered, her fingers nervously tapping against the strap of her bag, filled with what research we'd managed to salvage. As we approached the main gate, I could feel the familiar tugging of other timelines, possibilities swirling just beyond my perception. I pushed them aside, focusing on the here and now. A voice crackled over an unseen speaker. Halt! Identify yourselves. I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is your name. I believe you've been looking for me. There was a long pause, then a flurry of activity behind the gate. Finally, it swung open, revealing a squad of armed guards led by a stern-faced woman in a crisp suit. I'm Director Hawthorne, she said, her eyes never leaving my face. You've caused us quite a bit of trouble, your name. That wasn't our intention, I replied. We're here to talk, to find a way forward that benefits everyone. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but she nodded slightly. Follow me, and don't try anything unusual. We have measures in place to contain temporal anomalies. As we were led through the facility, I couldn't help but marvel at the technology around us. Screens displayed data I could barely comprehend, and strange machines hummed with barely contained energy. We were brought to a large conference room. At the head of the table sat a man I recognized from my visions, the one who had been arguing with Dr. Chen. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I'm Dr. Maxwell, head of the Temporal Research Division. I must say, I'm surprised to see you here voluntarily." "We're full of surprises," Sarah muttered, earning her a sharp look from one of the guards. I took a seat across from Dr. Maxwell, the others arranging themselves around me. "We're here because we need to understand what's happening, and because you need our help." Maxwell leaned back, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Our help? I think you overestimate your position, your name. You're an anomaly, yes, but one we can study and control." I felt a flicker of anger, and with it a surge of power. The lights in the room flickered, and for a moment I saw flashes of other versions of this meeting, ones where things went very differently. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice low. "I'm not just an anomaly. I'm a convergence point for all possible timelines, and right now, I'm the only thing keeping reality from tearing itself apart." To emphasize my point, I let my control slip just a fraction. The air shimmered, and suddenly we were all seeing double, overlapping versions of ourselves having slightly different conversations. Dr. Chen gasped. "Incredible. You're manifesting multiple quantum states simultaneously." Maxwell's composure cracked, fear flashing across his face before he regained control. "Enough. What do you want?" I released my hold on reality, letting things snap back to normal. "Like I said, we want to understand, and we want to help, but on our terms, not as your lab rats or weapons." Director Hawthorne, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "And why should we trust you? How do we know you won't use these abilities against us?" Dr. Reeves cleared his throat. "Because if your name wanted to harm you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be in a timeline where this facility never existed." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of his words sank in. Finally, Maxwell nodded. "Very well. We'll cooperate. But I want full access to all data we collect on your condition." "Agreed," I said. "But we work together, as equals. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas." As we began to hash out the details of our arrangement, I felt another temporal shift coming on. This time, instead of fighting it, I let it wash over me. I found myself standing in a vast, swirling vortex of light and energy. Countless timelines stretched out in all directions, intersecting and diverging in a cosmic dance. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside me. I turned to see myself, but not quite. This version seemed older, wiser, with an otherworldly glow about her. "Who are you?" I asked, though I felt I already knew the answer. She smiled. "I'm you, or rather, what you might become. The custodian of time, as some have called me." "Why am I here? Why was I chosen for this?" The other me gestured at the swirling timelines. "Because you have the capacity to see the bigger picture, to understand that every choice, every moment, ripples across all of reality." I watched as one timeline split into 2, then 4, then countless branches. "It's overwhelming," I whispered. "It is," she agreed. "But it's also a gift, the power to shape reality, to guide it towards better outcomes." "But how do I know what's better?" I asked. "How can I be sure I'm making the right choices?" She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch sending a jolt of energy through me. "You can't always be sure, but you can listen, learn, and always strive to do what's right, not just for one timeline, but for all of them." I nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose settling over me. "What do I do now?" "You go back," she said. "You work with them, learn from them, but never forget the responsibility you carry." As the vision began to fade, I heard her final words echoing through the vortex. The future of all realities is in your hands now. Choose wisely. I blinked, finding myself back in the conference room. Only seconds had passed, but I felt changed, more centered. "Are you all right?" Dr. Chen asked, noticing my momentary lapse. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'm fine. Just gaining some perspective." Turning back to Dr. Maxwell and Director Hawthorne, I leaned forward. "All right, let's talk about the future. Not just our future, but the future of every possible timeline." Over the next few hours, we laid out a plan. We would work together to study my abilities, to understand the nature of time itself. But more than that, we would use this knowledge to help steer reality towards better outcomes. It wouldn't be easy. I could see the greed in some of their eyes, the desire to use this power for personal gain. But I could also see the wonder, the genuine desire to understand and improve the world. As the meeting wrapped up, Dr. Maxwell approached me. "I hope you understand, your name, that what we're embarking on here will change everything, the very nature of reality as we know it." I met his gaze steadily. "I know. That's why we need to get it right." As we left the conference room, my companions gathered around me. "So, what now?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. I looked at each of them in turn, Sarah with her unwavering loyalty, Dr. Reeves with his boundless curiosity, and Dr. Chen with her brilliant mind and ethical compass. "Now," I said, feeling the weight of infinite futures resting on my shoulders, "we change the world. All of them." As we walked down the corridor towards our new future, I could feel the timeline shifting around us, adjusting to this new reality. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: the greatest adventure of all time, of all times, was just beginning. And somewhere, in the swirling vortex of possibility, I could almost hear my future self whispering, "Choose wisely. The fate of all realities depends on it." With each step, I felt more certain of our path. We weren't just exploring time anymore. We were becoming its guardians, its shepherds. And together we would write a future brighter than any single timeline could imagine. The story of time itself was unfolding before us, and we were holding the pen. It was time to start writing. Months had passed since our agreement with the facility, and the world, or rather worlds, had changed in ways I never could have imagined. The lab had become our home base, a nexus point where science and the impossible collided daily. I stood before a massive holographic display, watching as countless timelines pulsed and shifted like a cosmic tapestry. Dr. Chen's voice pulled me from my reverie. "Your name. We're picking up some unusual fluctuations in Sector 7, she said, her fingers dancing across a control panel. I focused my attention on the area she indicated, feeling the familiar tug of temporal energies. "I see it. It's like a knot in the fabric of time." Dr. Reeves hurried over, his eyes wide with excitement. "Fascinating. It appears to be a convergence point of multiple timelines. But why there? Why now?" Before I could answer, Sarah burst into the room, her usual calm demeanor rattled. "We've got a problem. A big one." Director Hawthorne followed close behind, her face grim. "We've detected a temporal incursion. Someone, or something, is moving between timelines, causing significant disruptions." My heart raced as I processed this information. We'd theorized about the possibility of other temporal travelers, but this was the first concrete evidence. "Show me," I demanded, turning back to the holographic display. Dr. Chen input a series of commands and the image zoomed in on a particular timeline. We watched in horror as entire sections of history seemed to unravel and rewrite themselves. "My God," Dr. Reeves whispered. "They're changing key moments in history. The ripple effects could be catastrophic." I closed my eyes, reaching out with my newfound senses. I could feel the disturbances now, like discordant notes in the symphony of time. "We need to stop them," I said. opening my eyes with newfound determination. Whatever they're doing, it's destabilizing the entire temporal continuum. Director Hawthorne nodded sharply. Agreed. But how do we track them? They could be anywhere, any when. A plan was already forming in my mind. We don't track them. We predict where they'll go next. I turned to Dr. Chen. The algorithms we've been developing to map temporal causality, can we use them to forecast potential targets? Her eyes lit up with understanding. Theoretically, yes. If we input the data from the incursions we've detected, we might be able to extrapolate their next move. Do it, I ordered, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. As Dr. Chen and her team worked feverishly at their stations, I pulled Sarah aside. I need you to prep for a temporal jump, I said in a low voice. If we're going to confront these intruders, we need to be ready for anything. Sarah nodded, her hand instinctively checking her weapon. I've got your back, always. Hours passed in a blur of calculations and preparations. Finally, Dr. Chen looked up from her work, exhaustion and triumph warring on her face. We've got it, she announced. Based on the pattern of incursions, we predict the next target will be July 20th, 1969. Dr. Reeves gasped. The moon landing, but why? It doesn't matter why, I said, moving towards the temporal transport chamber we'd constructed. What matters is stopping them before they can change one of the most pivotal moments in human history. Director Hawthorne stepped forward, concern etched on her face. This is incredibly risky. We've never attempted a targeted jump to a specific point in history. I met her gaze steadily. We don't have a choice. Every moment we delay, more damage is done to the timeline. She held my gaze for a long moment before nodding. Very well, but be careful. We have no idea what you're walking into. As Sarah and I prepared to enter the chamber, Dr. Reeves approached, holding what looked like a sleek wristwatch. Take this, he said, fastening it to my wrist. It's a temporal anchor. It should help you maintain your connection to our timeline and assist in your return jump. I smiled at him, grateful for his ever-present ingenuity. Thank you, Doctor. We'll be back before you know it. As the chamber doors sealed shut, I looked at Sarah. Ready for the greatest adventure in history? She grinned, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. Born ready. I closed my eyes, focusing on our destination. July 20th, 1969. The day humanity first set foot on another world. I could feel the temporal energy swirling around us, responding to my will. With a thought, I initiated the jump. The sensation was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It felt like being stretched across an infinite expanse, then snapped back like a rubber band. When I opened my eyes, we were standing on a dusty plain, the earth hanging like a blue marble in the pitch-black sky. We made it, Sarah breathed, her voice filled with awe. But our wonder was short-lived. In the distance, we could see a figure in a strange, shimmering suit approaching the lunar lander. There, I pointed. That's not supposed to be here. We moved as quickly as we could in the low gravity, our specially designed suits allowing us to cover ground faster than the original astronauts could have. As we drew closer, the figure turned. Even through the reflective visor, I could sense their surprise. Stop, I called out, my voice carrying strangely in the moon's thin atmosphere. Whatever you're planning, you don't understand the consequences. The figure paused, then reached up to their helmet. As the visor retracted, I gasped. The face staring back at me was my own, but older, hardened by years I hadn't yet lived. Oh, but I do understand, my older self said, her voice tinged with bitterness. I understand better than anyone. Sarah raised her weapon, but I put a hand on her arm, stopping her. Why are you doing this? I asked. Don't you realize the damage you're causing to the timeline? My older self laughed, a hollow sound. Damage? I'm trying to save it. The future, our future, is a nightmare. I'm here to change that. By erasing one of humanity's greatest achievements, I countered. How could that possibly help? You don't know what I've seen, she spat. The wars, the suffering, all stemming from the technology that grows out of this moment. I'm going to stop it before it begins. I shook my head, feeling a profound sadness for this version of myself. You can't know that. Every change you make could lead to even worse outcomes. We're supposed to protect the timeline, not destroy it. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. Then she steeled herself. I'm sorry, but I can't let you stop me. This is bigger than us. She raised a device in her hand, and I felt the familiar tug of temporal energy building around her. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grappling with my older self. We struggled, the low gravity making our movements awkward and unpredictable. Sarah, I called out. The device, destroy it. As we wrestled, Sarah took careful aim and fired. The device in my older self's hand exploded in a shower of sparks. No, she cried out, her voice filled with anguish. You don't know what you've done. I held her firmly, feeling her fight drain away. I know exactly what we've done. We've preserved history. We've given humanity a chance to write its own future, for better or worse. As the adrenaline faded, I became aware of a new sensation. The timeline was healing itself. I could feel the ripples of change subsiding, the continuum stabilizing. It's over, I said softly, as much to myself as to my older counterpart. Come back with us. Help us find a better way. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face in the low gravity. How can you be so sure we're doing the right thing? I smiled sadly. I'm not, but I have hope. And sometimes that's enough. As we prepared for the jump home, I cast one last look at the lunar lander. In the distance, I could see the tiny figures of Armstrong and Aldrin emerging, ready to take their historic first steps. With a thought, I initiated our return, the lunar surface fading away as we hurtled back through time to our own era. As we materialized in the temporal chamber, I knew that our work was far from over. There would be other challenges, other threats to the timeline, but we had taken a crucial step today. We had chosen hope over fear, preservation over destruction, and in doing so, we had reaffirmed our commitment to being the guardians of time itself. As the chamber doors opened and our relieved colleagues rushed to greet us, I couldn't help but smile. The greatest adventure in history was still unfolding, and we were right at the heart of it. The future, all futures, were still unwritten, and I was ready to face whatever came next, one timeline at a time. The aftermath of our lunar encounter had left us all shaken, but also more determined than ever. The realization that there were other temporal travelers out there, some with intentions far from benevolent, had forced us to reconsider our approach to safeguarding the timeline. It was Dr. Reeves who first proposed the idea during one of our daily briefings. What we need, he said, pacing excitedly before the holographic display of timelines, is a sort of temporal United Nations, a Congress of representatives from various points in time, all working together to maintain the integrity of the continuum. Director Hawthorne frowned, her brow furrowed. That sounds incredibly risky. Bringing together people from different time periods could cause untold paradoxes. I leaned forward, intrigued by the concept. But what if we could make it work? A collective effort to protect time itself. It could be revolutionary. Dr. Chen nodded slowly, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. We would need to create a neutral zone, a place outside of normal time where representatives could meet without affecting their own timelines. I think I might be able to help with that, I said, feeling the familiar tug of temporal energies at my fingertips. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into the project. Using my unique abilities as a focal point, we managed to create a pocket dimension, a bubble of space-time that existed between moments, accessible from any point in history. As our plans took shape, we began the delicate process of reaching out to potential representatives. We sought out individuals from key points in human history, scientists, philosophers, leaders who had shown an aptitude for understanding the bigger picture. The day of the first Temporal Congress arrived with a mix of excitement and trepidation. One by one, Our invited guests arrived in the neutral zone, each looking around in wonder at the impossible space we had created. I stood at the center of the gathered crowd, feeling the weight of history, past, present, and future, pressing down on me. "Welcome," I began, my voice carrying across the assembly. "You've been brought here because each of you represents a crucial point in the tapestry of time. Together, we face a challenge unlike any other, the preservation of history itself." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw confusion, disbelief, and in some faces, a growing understanding of the magnitude of what we were undertaking. A tall man with wild hair and a mustache stepped forward. Albert Einstein, plucked from 1945. "This is extraordinary," he said, his accent thick, but his eyes bright with curiosity. "You speak of preserving history, but have we not already altered it simply by being here?" I smiled, appreciating his quick grasp of the situation. "A fair point, Dr. Einstein. But this place exists outside of normal time. What happens here will not directly affect your own timelines unless we choose to implement changes. And who decides what changes are necessary?" This from a regal-looking woman I recognized as Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. "By what authority do we presume to shape the course of history?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I took a deep breath before responding. "By no authority but that which we grant ourselves," I said carefully. "We are not here to play God or to rewrite history on a whim. Our goal is to protect the integrity of time itself, to prevent those who would use temporal travel for selfish or destructive purposes." "Like the incident on the moon," Sarah added, stepping up beside me. "We've already encountered individuals attempting to alter pivotal moments in history. Without a united front, we risk the entire continuum unraveling." This sparked a flurry of discussion among the assembled representatives. I could see alliances forming, questions being raised, and ideas beginning to take shape. As the initial shock wore off, we broke into smaller groups to discuss specific issues. I found myself in a heated debate with Ada Lovelace, Leonardo da Vinci, and a cybernetics expert from 2075. "The potential for information exchange across time is staggering," Ada was saying, her eyes alight with the possibilities. "Imagine the advancements we could make if we could share knowledge across centuries." "But at what cost?" the future scientist countered. "Introducing advanced concepts too early could radically alter the course of technological development. We could end up erasing entire fields of study before they even begin." Leonardo nodded sagely. "There must be a balance, a way to guide and nurture the natural progression of ideas without overwhelming the minds of any one time." As I listened to their discussion, I felt a sudden shift in the temporal energies around us. A ripple passed through the neutral zone, and suddenly, a new figure appeared in our midst. She was tall and ethereal, with eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she spoke, her voice resonated with the weight of eons. "I am the Timekeeper," she announced, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "I have watched the flow of time since the first moment of creation, and I am here to warn you of a grave threat." The room fell silent, all attention focused on this unexpected arrival. "What you are attempting here is noble," the Timekeeper continued, "but it has drawn the attention of forces beyond your comprehension. There are beings who exist outside of time, who see your meddling as a threat to their dominion." I stepped forward, my heart racing. "What kind of beings? What do they want?" The Timekeeper turned her cosmic gaze on me. "They are the chronovores, entities that feed on distortions in the timeline. Your efforts to stabilize time have reduced their feeding grounds, and now they seek to destroy the very concept of linear time itself." A ripple of fear passed through the assembly. Dr. Chen spoke up, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "How can we stop them? We barely understand our own place in the timeline, let alone how to combat extratemporal beings." The Timekeeper's expression softened slightly. "That is why I have come. To prepare you for the battle ahead. The chronovores will seek to create massive paradoxes, to twist the timeline into knots that they can consume, Your task is to maintain the integrity of history while fending off their attacks. But how? Dr. Reeves asked, his scientific mind already racing with possibilities. What weapons could we possibly use against such entities? Knowledge is your weapon, the timekeeper replied. Understanding. The very Congress you have created here is the key. By working together across time, you can weave a stronger fabric of reality, one that can withstand the chronovore's assault. As the implications of her words sank in, I felt a new sense of purpose settling over me. We had thought we were simply protecting history, but now we found ourselves on the front lines of a war for the very nature of time itself. We'll need to expand our efforts, I said, addressing the assembly. Not just representatives from Earth's history, but from all of human history, including our future in the stars. We need every perspective, every bit of knowledge we can gather. Nods of agreement rippled through the crowd. The initial shock and skepticism had been replaced by a steely determination. If I may, a soft voice spoke up. I turned to see a young woman in simple robes, Mary Anning, the 19th century paleontologist. Perhaps we should also consider the deep past. The lessons buried in the bones of the earth might hold secrets that could aid us in this fight. An excellent suggestion, I agreed. We'll need to carefully consider how to incorporate knowledge from prehistory without risking contamination of the timeline. As discussions broke out anew, now tinged with an urgency we hadn't felt before, I approached the timekeeper. Thank you for the warning, I said softly. But I have to ask, why help us? If you've watched over time for so long, why intervene now? Her cosmic eyes seemed to look through me, seeing all the potential versions of myself across the multiverse. Because you have done something unprecedented, she replied. In all the vast expanse of time, I have never seen beings come together like this, to shoulder the responsibility of shepherding history itself. You have kindled a spark of hope in a universe that sorely needs it. With those words, she began to fade from view. Prepare yourselves, her voice echoed as she disappeared. The chronovores are coming, and all of time hangs in the balance. As her presence faded, I turned back to the assembly, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. We had started this journey seeking to protect history, and now we found ourselves defending the very concept of time. The Temporal Congress had become more than just a governing body. It was now the last line of defense against cosmic forces beyond our comprehension. As I met the determined gazes of representatives from across human history, I felt a surge of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united across the ages by a common purpose. The war for time had begun, and we were ready to fight. The warning from the timekeeper had galvanized the Temporal Congress into action. In the weeks that followed, we worked tirelessly to prepare for the coming storm. Our neutral zone buzzed with activity as representatives from across history shared knowledge, developed strategies, and trained for the unimaginable task of battling beings that existed outside of time itself. I stood before the holographic display, watching as timelines pulsed and shifted. Suddenly, a violent ripple tore through the fabric of history. It's starting, I called out, my voice tight with tension. The chronovores are making their move. Dr. Chen rushed to my side, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm detecting massive temporal distortions. They're targeting key moments in history, trying to create paradoxes. Where? Director Hawthorne demanded, striding into the room. Everywhere, I breathed, watching in horror as entire sections of the timeline began to unravel. They're attacking across multiple points simultaneously. Sarah, who had been overseeing our hastily assembled temporal defense force, joined us at the display. We need to split up, hit them on all fronts. I nodded, my mind racing. Agreed. We'll need teams at each major incursion point. Dr. Chen, can you coordinate from here? Already on it, she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before us. I turned to the assembled group of temporal agents, a mix of historians, scientists, and carefully selected individuals from various time periods, all trained in the basics of temporal mechanics. This is what we've prepared for, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Remember your training. Preserve the timeline at all costs. And whatever you do, don't let the chronovores isolate you. They'll try to separate us, to weaken our collective strength. As the teams prepared to depart, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Leonardo da Vinci, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. I never imagined my studies of time and motion would lead to this, he said with a wry smile. But I am honored to stand with you in defense of all we hold dear. I clasped his hand, grateful for his steady presence. Your insights have been invaluable, Leonardo. Remember, in this fight, your mind is your greatest weapon. With a final nod to Dr. Chen, I initiated the jump sequence. The world dissolved around me in a swirl of temporal energy. I materialized in the midst of chaos. Smoke filled the air, and the sounds of battle echoed in the distance. It took me a moment to orient myself. I was in ancient Rome, on the day of Julius Caesar's assassination. A figure in a shimmering, otherworldly form was advancing on a group of senators. With a start, I realized this must be a chronovore in its physical manifestation. "Stop!" I shouted, channeling temporal energy into a barrier between the creature and its targets. The chronovore turned, its form shifting and writhing in ways that hurt my eyes to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Ah, the anomaly," it hissed. "You think you can stop us? We are eternal. We are infinite. Your concept of time is but a fleeting illusion." I stood my ground, feeling the weight of history pressing down around me. "Maybe so, but it's our illusion, and we'll defend it with everything we have." The creature laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Defend it? You don't even understand it. Watch as we unmake your precious timeline." It lashed out with tendrils of pure chronological energy. I dodged, feeling the fabric of reality warp and twist where the attack landed. "Now, Brutus," I shouted, praying our hastily arranged plan would work. From the shadows, Marcus Brutus emerged, clutching a device we had provided him, a temporal anchor, designed to stabilize the surrounding area against paradoxes. The chronovore screamed in rage as the device activated, its form becoming more solid, more vulnerable. "Impossible!" it shrieked. "You dare use time itself against us?" I pressed our advantage, drawing on my connection to the timeline to launch a counterattack. Waves of temporal energy burst from my hands, each one carefully calibrated to repair the damage the chronovore had done. As we battled, I caught glimpses of the history we were fighting to preserve. Caesar fell on the Senate steps, his betrayal playing out as it always had. The timeline shuddered but held. With a final, reality-bending screech, the chronovore dissolved, driven back to whatever non-space it called home. I slumped to the ground, exhausted. Brutus approached cautiously, the temporal anchor still humming in his hands. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. I shook my head, already feeling the tug of other distortions calling me. "Not even close. But we've won this battle. Thank you, Brutus. History will remember your courage today, even if it can never know the full extent of it." As I prepared to jump to the next crisis point, my communicator crackled to life. It was Dr. Chen, her voice tight with stress. "Your name. We've got problems. The chronovores are adapting, changing their tactics. They're targeting moments of scientific discovery, trying to stunt humanity's understanding of time itself." I cursed under my breath. "They're learning, trying to weaken our conceptual defenses. Where do you need me?" "Cambridge, 1665, she replied. "Isaac Newton's Annus Mirabilis. If they disrupt his work on calculus and motion, the repercussions will be catastrophic." With a thought, I initiated the jump, the ancient Roman landscape dissolving around me. I materialized in a quiet college room, where a young Isaac Newton sat at his desk, surrounded by papers covered in complex equations. But something was wrong. His eyes were glazed over and his hand moved across the page in jerky, unnatural motions. "Newton," I called out, You need to fight it. His head snapped up and I saw the telltale shimmer of chronovore influence around him. Who are you? He demanded, his voice oddly distorted. What's happening to me? I approached cautiously, my hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. I'm here to help. You're under attack by beings that want to stop your work, but you need to resist. Your discoveries are crucial to the future of humanity. Newton shook his head violently, as if trying to clear it. My mind, it feels like it's being torn apart. They're trying to make me forget, to unlearn everything I've discovered. I could feel the temporal distortions building around us. If Newton's fundamental work on physics and mathematics was erased, the damage to the timeline would be incalculable. Focus on your work, I urged him, on the truth you know is there, just waiting to be uncovered. Your mind is powerful, Newton. Use it. As he struggled against the chronovore influence, I reached out with my own abilities, trying to stabilize the local timeline. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with my bare hands. Just when I thought we might lose this crucial moment in scientific history, Newton's eyes cleared. He looked down at his papers, a spark of recognition igniting. Of course, he murmured. It's all so clear now. The mathematics of change, of motion. It's been there all along. As he spoke, I felt the timeline solidify around us. The chronovore presence receded, howling in defeat. Newton looked up at me, a mix of confusion and gratitude on his face. I don't fully understand what just happened, but I sense that you've done me, and the world, a great service. I smiled, relief washing over me. Just keep working, Sir Isaac. The world is waiting for your brilliance. As I prepared to jump to the next crisis point, I allowed myself a moment of hope. We were holding our own against the chronovores, preserving the crucial moments that shaped human history and understanding. But I knew the fight was far from over. As I felt the pull of the next temporal disturbance, I steeled myself for whatever challenges lay ahead. The war for time itself raged on, and we were the only line of defense against the unraveling of everything we held dear. With a final nod to Newton, who had already turned back to his equations with renewed vigor, I leapt once more into the swirling vortex of time, ready to face whatever the chronovores threw at us next. The fate of history, of reality itself, hung in the balance, and I was determined to see it through no matter the cost. The battle against the chronovores had been raging across time and space for what felt like an eternity. We had won victories and suffered defeats, but the fabric of reality was beginning to show signs of strain. As I materialized back in our temporal headquarters, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. Dr. Chen looked up from her console, her face etched with worry. Welcome back. How bad was it? I slumped into a nearby chair, running a hand through my hair. We managed to preserve the signing of the Magna Carta, but it was close. The chronovores are getting stronger, more adaptive. It's like they're learning from each encounter. Director Hawthorne strode into the room, her usual composure showing cracks of fatigue. We can't keep this up indefinitely. We need a new strategy. As if in response to her words, the air in the center of the room began to shimmer. The ethereal form of the timekeeper materialized before us. Your efforts have been valiant, she said, her voice resonating with cosmic power. But the timekeeper is right. A defensive war cannot be won. You must take the fight to the chronovores themselves. Sarah, who had just returned from her own mission, stepped forward. But how? We don't even know where they come from. The timekeeper's gaze swept across all of us. They come from the spaces between moments, the void where time has no meaning. To confront them, you must journey to the temporal nexus, the point where all timelines converge. Dr. Reeves, who had been quietly working on calculations in the corner, looked up sharply. The temporal nexus? But that's just a theoretical construct. We have no way to reach such a place. You do now, the timekeeper said, turning to me. Your unique connection to the timeline has been growing stronger. With the right focus, you can guide a team to the nexus. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze upon me. The responsibility was immense. but I knew we had no choice. What do I need to do? The timekeeper approached me, her form shimmering with temporal energy. You must gather a team of your most trusted allies. At the moment of convergence, when the timelines align, you will need to channel all of your power to tear open a path to the Nexus. She paused, her expression growing grave. But be warned, the journey will be perilous. The chronovores will sense your approach and do everything in their power to stop you. And once in the Nexus, the very laws of reality as you know them will cease to apply. Director Hawthorne stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. We understand the risks. But if this is our best chance to end this war, we have to take it. I nodded, my mind already racing with plans. How long do we have to prepare? The next convergence point will occur in 72 hours, the timekeeper replied. Use this time wisely, gather your strength, choose your team with care, and prepare for a battle unlike any you have faced before. With those words, she faded from view, leaving us to contemplate the monumental task ahead. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. We pored over every scrap of data we had on the chronovores, trying to devise weapons and strategies that might be effective in a place beyond time. Dr. Chen and her team worked tirelessly to modify our equipment to function in the chaotic environment of the Nexus. As the hour of convergence approached, I gathered my chosen team, Sarah, with her tactical expertise and unwavering loyalty, Dr. Reeves, whose brilliant mind had gotten us out of countless tight spots, and to everyone's surprise, Leonardo da Vinci, whose unique perspective and inventive genius I felt would be crucial in the unpredictable environment of the Nexus. As we stood before the temporal transport chamber, Director Hawthorne approached us. I don't need to tell you how much is riding on this mission. The fate of all reality rests in your hands. I clasped her shoulder, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. We won't let you down. Hold the fort while we're gone and be ready for anything. With final nods to our colleagues, we stepped into the chamber. I could feel the temporal energies building around us, the timelines beginning to align. Whatever happens, I said to my team, remember why we're fighting. For every moment of joy, of discovery, of love that has ever existed or ever will, we are the guardians of time itself. As the convergence reached its peak, I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind. I could feel the vast tapestry of time stretching out in all directions. With every ounce of will I possessed, I focused on the point where all threads met, the temporal nexus. The world around us exploded in a cacophony of light and sound. We were falling, tumbling through a maelstrom of fractured realities. Glimpses of past, present, and future flashed by in a dizzying kaleidoscope. And then suddenly, stillness. We found ourselves standing on what appeared to be a vast plain, stretching out to infinity in all directions. But the sky, if it could be called that, was a swirling vortex of timelines, weaving and intersecting in complex patterns. My God, Dr. Reeves breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. We actually made it. Leonardo was sketching furiously in a notebook he had brought, trying to capture the impossible geometry of our surroundings. In all my studies of perspective and space, I never imagined anything like this. Sarah, ever vigilant, had her weapon at the ready. Stay alert. Just because we can't see the chronovores doesn't mean they're not here. As if summoned by her words, the air around us began to distort. Shapes emerged from the very fabric of the Nexus, the chronovores in their true form. They were vast, incomprehensible beings of pure temporal energy. Looking at them directly was like trying to solve an impossible equation. My mind rebelled against their non-Euclidean geometry. One of the chronovores spoke, its voice resonating through time itself. You dare to enter our domain? Your audacity is matched only by your foolishness. I stepped forward, channeling all of my temporal abilities to create a protective barrier around our team. We've come to end this war. Your attacks on the timeline have to stop. The chronovore's laughter shook the very foundations of the Nexus. End the war, foolish mortal. We are eternal. We have feasted on the death of universes. Your paltry timeline is but a morsel to us. Dr. Reeves, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear, called out, "But why? What do you gain from destroying time itself?" Another chronovore answered, its form shifting and pulsing. "Gain? We do not think in your limited terms of gain and loss. We are change itself, the entropy that awaits at the end of all things. It is our nature to consume, to unmake." As they spoke, I could feel them probing at our defenses, looking for weaknesses. Sarah and Leonardo had moved into defensive positions, ready to act at a moment's notice. "There has to be another way," I insisted, straining to maintain our protective barrier. "A balance. Surely beings of your power can understand the importance of preservation as well as change." The first chronovore's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. "You speak of balance, yet you understand so little. We are balance. Without us, time would stagnate, become fixed and immutable. We are the forces that allow for free will, for the possibility of change." Leonardo, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Then why not work with us? Guide change, rather than forcing it through destruction. Your power could be used to nurture timelines, not erase them." For a moment, the chronovores seemed to pause, considering. Then, without warning, they attacked. Waves of temporal energy crashed against my barrier. I staggered under the assault, feeling as if the weight of eons was pressing down upon me. "Now!" I shouted to my team. Sarah opened fire with her specially modified weapon, designed to disrupt temporal fields. Dr. Reeves activated a device of his own creation, meant to stabilize local spacetime against the chronovore's reality-warping powers. Leonardo, in a stroke of genius, had created a series of mirrors and lenses that, when aligned properly, reflected the chronovore's own energy back at them. The battle that followed defied description. We fought across dimensions, through fractured timelines and possible futures. Every moment was an eternity, every movement a journey across eons. Just when it seemed we might be overwhelmed, I felt a surge of power unlike anything I had experienced before. The timelines themselves were responding to our struggle, lending us their strength. With a final monumental effort, I channeled this power into a blast of pure temporal energy. The chronovores reeled back, their forms flickering and distorting. "Enough!" the lead chronovore bellowed, its voice shaking the foundations of the Nexus. We will parley." As the chaos of battle subsided, I lowered our defenses slightly, ready to raise them again at a moment's notice. "We're listening," I said cautiously. The chronovores conferred among themselves in a language that seemed to consist of shifting probabilities and quantum states. Finally, they turned back to us. "We propose a covenant," they said in unison. "We will cease our direct attacks on your timeline, allowing it to develop naturally. In return, you will grant us access to the temporal energy released by natural points of change and decision." Dr. Reeves stepped forward, his scientific mind racing. "A symbiotic relationship. They feed on the energy of change without forcing it, and our timeline remains intact." I considered the proposal carefully. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, a chance for coexistence rather than endless war. "We accept," I said finally, "on the condition that this covenant applies to all timelines, not just our own." The chronovores pulsed with what might have been agreement. "It is done. The covenant is sealed across all realities." As their words echoed through the Nexus, I felt a shift in the very fabric of time-space. The constant pressure we had been fighting against for so long suddenly eased. Leonardo, ever the visionary, spoke up. "Perhaps in time we might even learn from each other. The mysteries of time and change are vast, and there is much we could discover together." The chronovore's form shimmered in what might have been curiosity. "Perhaps the future, all futures, are now open to new possibilities." As we prepared to return to our own time, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. tinged with uncertainty. We had achieved more than I had ever thought possible, but I knew our work as guardians of time was far from over. The temporal nexus began to fade around us as I initiated our return jump. The last thing I saw before we were engulfed in the time vortex was the swirling tapestry of timelines, now flowing more smoothly, more harmoniously than ever before. We had written a new chapter in the history of time itself. What came next was up to us, all of us across every moment of existence, to decide. Excitement tingled through me as we made contact with resistance groups in other realities. It was a surreal experience, watching screens light up with faces of people who, just like us, had broken free from their temporal loops and were determined to end the experiment that had wreaked havoc across countless lives. Each version of the resistance had its unique quirks, reflecting the subtle and not-so-subtle differences in their timelines. Tension coiled within me as we coordinated a multi-dimensional attack on the facility. The plan was ambitious and fraught with risks, but we were united in our purpose. We couldn't allow the facility to continue its experiments and endanger more lives. We were racing against time, literally planning simultaneous strikes across timelines. Adrenaline surged as we put our plan into action, each group synchronized with military precision despite the barriers of reality separating us. As we breached the facility's defenses, alarms blared, echoing eerily similar in every timeline. The scene was chaotic, yet eerily familiar. Shock reverberated through me when we encountered unexpected resistance from alternate versions of ourselves. I turned a corner, leading my team through a narrow corridor, only to come face to face with another me, dressed in a lab coat, wielding a weapon with a determined expression. "Stop!" my counterpart shouted, her voice resonating with a conviction that shook me to the core. "Who are you?" I demanded, though the answer was painfully obvious. "I'm you, from this timeline, and I'm not letting you sabotage our work," she replied, her eyes blazing with passion. Conflict tore at my heart as I grappled with the moral implications of our discovery. How could another version of me believe in this experiment's potential, knowing the pain and suffering it caused? My mind raced with memories of the lives shattered, the loops that trapped countless souls in endless cycles of torment. "We're trying to stop this madness," I argued, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "You have no idea the damage this experiment has done." "Damage?" she scoffed. "You mean the sacrifices we've made to understand the very fabric of time itself? This work is crucial." Behind her, I saw other versions of my friends, their faces filled with the same determination. It was a surreal and horrifying sight, confronting ourselves in such a visceral way. "Listen," I said, lowering my weapon slightly. "We don't have to be enemies. We can find a way to stabilize the timelines without causing more harm." "How?" she demanded, her resolve wavering for a moment. "How can we do that without abandoning our research?" Clarity dawned as we reached a compromise, agreeing to find a way to stabilize the timelines without erasing them. It was a tentative truce, a fragile understanding that we would work together to find a solution. "Trust me," I said, extending my hand. "We can do this. Together." Hope swelled in my chest as we combined our knowledge to work towards a solution. The tension in the air remained thick, but there was a new sense of purpose, a shared goal that transcended our individual timelines. We gathered in the facility's main control room, our counterparts joining us in a tense yet hopeful collaboration. The room was filled with the hum of machinery and the soft click of keyboards as we worked to decode the intricate mechanisms behind the temporal anomalies. "Look at this," my counterpart said, pointing to a complex diagram on the screen. "If we adjust the frequency here, we might be able to stabilize the fluctuations without causing a collapse." I nodded, understanding the implications. It's risky, but it's our best shot. We worked tirelessly, the hours blending into one another as we delved deeper into the science of temporal mechanics. Every breakthrough was met with cautious optimism, every setback with renewed determination. As the clock ticked towards the moment of truth, tension mounted. We were racing against time once again, but this time, We were united in our efforts. "It's ready," one of the scientists said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. "We can activate the stabilization protocol." Fear gripped me when unforeseen complications arose, threatening to undo our progress. The machinery sputtered, warning lights flashing as the system struggled to handle the load. "Hold on," I shouted, my hands flying over the controls. "We can't let it fail now." Determination steeled my nerves as we pushed through exhaustion and setbacks. We were so close, and I refused to let our efforts go to waste. The room was a flurry of activity, each of us working in unison, driven by the same desperate hope. Relief washed over me as we finally activated the stabilization protocol. The machinery whirred to life, the lights steadying as the system accepted our adjustments. The air seemed to hum with a new energy, a sense of balance returning to the fabric of reality. "It's working," my counterpart said, her voice filled with awe. "We've done it." Exhaustion hit me like a wave, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of accomplishment. We had faced insurmountable odds, confronted the darker parts of ourselves, and emerged victorious. As we stood together, our counterparts from different timelines, there was a moment of silent understanding. We had achieved something incredible, something that transcended the boundaries of our individual realities. "Thank you," I said, looking at my alternate self. "We couldn't have done this without you." "Thank you," she replied, her eyes softening, "for showing me another way." The sense of unity and shared purpose was palpable as we prepared to return to our respective timelines. The temporal transport devices hummed softly, ready to take us back to the lives we had fought so hard to protect. As I stepped into the device, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Excitement for the future, sadness for the goodbyes, and a deep sense of hope for what lay ahead. We had faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. Hope and resolve intertwined within me as I prepared to face whatever the future held, ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. The journey was far from over, but we had taken the first crucial step towards a better, more stable future, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. Determination fueled me as I engaged in a battle of wits with my alternate self. We stood on opposite sides of the control room, our teams tensely watching, each of us armed not with weapons but with our convictions and knowledge. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "We've made so many breakthroughs. We've unlocked secrets about time that could change everything." "And at what cost?" I countered, stepping closer. "How many lives have been shattered because of this experiment? How many people are trapped in those endless loops, suffering because of our curiosity?" She hesitated, the conflict evident in her eyes. It was a surreal experience arguing with myself. We were so similar, yet our paths had diverged so drastically. Empathy softened my resolve as I began to understand her perspective and motivations. She wasn't a villain, she was another version of me, driven by the same thirst for knowledge, the same desire to make a difference. "Do you remember when we first got into this field?" I asked, my voice gentler now. "We wanted to help people, to understand the universe and use that knowledge for good." "Yes," she said softly. "But this work, it has the potential to do so much more." "Potential isn't worth the pain it's causing," I replied. "We have to find a way to stabilize the timelines without continuing these experiments. We can't keep sacrificing innocent lives." Conflict raged within me as I grappled with the possibility that our actions might cause more harm than good. It was a delicate balance, finding a solution that would preserve the knowledge we had gained while preventing further damage. Clarity dawned as we reached a compromise, agreeing to find a way to stabilize the timelines without erasing them. We needed a solution that would allow us to protect the integrity of time without destroying everything we had worked for. "Let's combine our efforts," I suggested. "We can stabilize the timelines and preserve our research, but we have to do it ethically." She nodded slowly, the tension easing from her posture. "All right, let's see what we can come up with together." Hope swelled in my chest as we combined our knowledge to work towards a solution. The room was abuzz with activity, our teams merging into a single, cohesive unit. We pored over data, analyzing the temporal anomalies and brainstorming ways to counteract them. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a graph on one of the monitors. "If we adjust the energy output here, we can create a stabilization field that should hold the timeline steady." "It could work," I agreed, feeling a surge of excitement. "But we'll need to synchronize the field across all realities." Hours turned into days as we worked tirelessly, our combined efforts bringing us closer to a solution. The breakthroughs came in waves, each one building on the last, each one bringing us closer to our goal. As the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, the room filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. We were ready to activate the stabilization protocol, to finally bring an end to the chaos that had plagued us for so long. "Are you ready?" I asked, looking at my counterpart. She nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "Let's do this." Fear gripped me when unforeseen complications arose, threatening to undo our progress. The machinery hummed ominously, warning lights flashing as the system struggled to handle the load. "What's happening?" someone shouted, panic creeping into their voice. "The system's overloaded," my counterpart said, her hands flying over the controls. "We need to stabilize it manually." Determination steeled my nerves as we pushed through exhaustion and setbacks. We worked side by side, our movements synchronized, each of us anticipating the other's actions. The room was a flurry of activity, our teams working in perfect harmony. "Almost there," she said, her voice tense with concentration. "Just a little more." Relief washed over me as we finally activated the stabilization protocol. The machinery whirred to life, the lights steadying as the system accepted our adjustments. The air seemed to hum with a new energy, a sense of balance returning to the fabric of reality. "It's working," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "We've done it." Exhaustion hit me like a wave, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of accomplishment. We had faced insurmountable odds, confronted the darker parts of ourselves, and emerged victorious. As we stood together, our counterparts from different timelines, there was a moment of silent understanding. We had achieved something incredible, something that transcended the boundaries of our individual realities. "Thank you," I said, looking at my alternate self. "We couldn't have done this without you." "Thank you," she replied, her eyes softening, "for showing me another way." The sense of unity and shared purpose was palpable as we prepared to return to our respective timelines. The temporal transport devices hummed softly, ready to take us back to the lives we had fought so hard to protect. "Before we go," she said, turning to me, "I want you to have this." She handed me a small, intricately designed pendant. "It's a token of our journey, a reminder of what we've accomplished." I took the pendant, feeling its weight in my hand. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." As I stepped into the device, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Excitement for the future, sadness for the goodbyes, and a deep sense of hope for what lay ahead. We had faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. Hope and resolve intertwined within me as I prepared to face whatever the future held, ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. The journey was far from over, but we had taken the first crucial step towards a better, more stable future. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. Excitement buzzed through me as we made a breakthrough in understanding the temporal mechanics. The previous day's cooperation with my alternate self had resulted in a flood of new ideas and theories, and we were finally seeing the fruits of our labor. The control room was alive with activity, scientists and technicians working in perfect harmony as we prepared for the final phase of our plan. "We've done it," my counterpart said, her eyes shining with triumph. We've mapped out the temporal fluctuations and found a way to stabilize them. The screen in front of us displayed a complex network of energy patterns, each one representing a different timeline. The key to our success lay in synchronizing these patterns, creating a harmonious balance that would prevent further anomalies. Tension mounted as we raced against time to implement our solution before the timelines collapsed. The air was thick with anticipation, every second feeling like an eternity as we made the final adjustments. "Is everything ready?" I asked, turning to my team. "Almost," said Lisa, one of our lead engineers. "We're just finalizing the synchronization protocols." Fear gripped me when unforeseen complications arose, threatening to undo our progress. The machinery started to sputter, warning lights flashing as the system struggled to handle the load. "What's happening?" my counterpart shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. "The system is overheating," Lisa replied, her voice tense. "We need to divert some of the power to auxiliary generators, or it will shut down." Determination steeled my nerves as we pushed through exhaustion and setbacks. We couldn't afford to fail now, not when we were so close to stabilizing the timelines. I took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. "Redirect power from non-essential systems," I instructed. "We need to keep the core stable." Adrenaline surged through me as we worked tirelessly, our hands moving in a blur as we made the necessary adjustments. The room was a cacophony of sounds, the hum of machinery blending with the frantic clicking of keyboards and the steady beep of monitors. "It's holding," Lisa said, relief evident in her voice. "We've stabilized the core." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but we knew the hardest part was still ahead. We had to activate the stabilization protocol, a process that would require precision timing and flawless execution. "All teams, prepare for activation," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves churning in my stomach. "On my mark." Fear gripped me when unforeseen complications arose, threatening to undo our progress. The machinery hummed ominously, warning lights flashing as the system struggled to handle the load. "What's happening?" someone shouted, panic creeping into their voice. "The system's overloaded," my counterpart said, her hands flying over the controls. "We need to stabilize it manually." Determination steeled my nerves as we pushed through exhaustion and setbacks. We worked side by side, our movements synchronized, each of us anticipating the other's actions. The room was a flurry of activity, our teams working in perfect harmony. "Almost there," she said, her voice tense with concentration. "Just a little more." Relief washed over me as we finally activated the stabilization protocol. The machinery whirred to life, the lights steadying as the system accepted our adjustments. The air seemed to hum with a new energy, a sense of balance returning to the fabric of reality. "It's working," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "We've done it." Exhaustion hit me like a wave, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of accomplishment. We had faced insurmountable odds, confronted the darker parts of ourselves, and emerged victorious. As we stood together, our counterparts from different timelines, there was a moment of silent understanding. We had achieved something incredible, something that transcended the boundaries of our individual realities. "Thank you," I said, looking at my alternate self. "We couldn't have done this without you." "Thank you," she replied, her eyes softening, "for showing me another way." The sense of unity and shared purpose was palpable as we prepared to return to our respective timelines. The temporal transport devices hummed softly, ready to take us back to the lives we had fought so hard to protect. "Before we go," she said, turning to me, "I want you to have this." She handed me a small, intricately designed pendant. "It's a token of our journey, a reminder of what we've accomplished." I took the pendant, feeling its weight in my hand. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." As I stepped into the device, a mix of emotions swirled within me. Excitement for the future, sadness for the goodbyes, and a deep sense of hope for what lay ahead. We had faced our greatest challenge and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. Hope and resolve intertwined within me as I prepared to face whatever the future held, ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. The journey was far from over, but we had taken the first crucial step towards a better, more stable future. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. The familiar sensation of temporal displacement washed over me as I returned to my original timeline. The control room shimmered and then solidified around me, the faces of my team coming into focus. Relief and exhaustion were etched into every line of their faces, but there was also a palpable sense of triumph. "Welcome back," Lisa said, smiling wearily. "How did it go?" "We did it," I replied, holding up the pendant. "The timelines are stabilized." Joy erupted around me, my team celebrating the victory we had all fought so hard to achieve. As the noise subsided, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the friends and allies I had made in the other timelines. "We've come so far," I said, addressing my team. "But we can't afford to become complacent. We need to monitor the timelines and ensure that they remain stable." "We're with you," Lisa said, her eyes reflecting the same determination I felt. "Whatever it takes." As we set to work, a sense of purpose and resolve settled over me. We had succeeded in our mission, but the journey was far from over. We would continue to protect the stability of our world, ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a surge of pride for my team and all we had accomplished. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. The pendant around my neck was a constant reminder of the journey we had taken and the allies we had made along the way. As I prepared to face whatever the future held, I knew that we were ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. Together, we would forge a path towards a better, more stable future. Unite anxiety churned in my stomach as we waited to see if our efforts had been successful. The control room was eerily silent, every eye glued to the monitors that displayed the delicate balance of temporal energy we had worked so hard to stabilize. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Are we sure it's holding?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All readings are stable," my counterpart confirmed, her gaze intense as she scanned the data. "The timelines are synchronized." Joy exploded within me when we confirmed that the timelines had been stabilized. A wave of relief washed over the room, followed by cheers and embraces as we celebrated our victory. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, we had succeeded in our mission. "We did it," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "We actually did it." Sadness tugged at my heart as I realized I must say goodbye to the allies I'd made across the different timelines. Each of them had become a part of my journey, and the thought of never seeing them again weighed heavily on me. My alternate self approached, her eyes reflecting the same mix of emotions I felt. "This is it," she said softly. "Time to go back." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Nor I without you," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Good luck." As we hugged, a sense of finality settled over me. We had shared an incredible journey, and now it was time to part ways. Uncertainty clouded my mind as I prepared to return to my original timeline. What would I find when I got back? Would everything be as I left it, or would there be subtle differences that would remind me of the trials we'd faced? "Ready?" Lisa asked, her hand hovering over the control panel. "Ready?" I said, taking a deep breath. Hope fluttered in my chest as I stepped into the temporal transport device. The familiar hum enveloped me, and the world around me dissolved into a swirl of light and color. Disorientation overwhelmed me as I materialized in my familiar Seattle apartment. I staggered slightly, grabbing onto the nearest piece of furniture to steady myself. The room looked exactly as I remembered it, but there was an underlying sense of unease, a fear that something might be different. Confusion swirled in my mind as I tried to reconcile my memories with this reality. I took a deep breath and walked through the apartment, touching familiar objects, letting the sense of normalcy wash over me. Relief flooded through me when I confirmed that my loved ones were safe and unaware of the ordeal. I called my parents, my voice trembling as I heard their familiar, comforting voices. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I just wanted to check in." "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to hear your voice," my mom said, her warmth reaching through the phone. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, fighting back tears. "I just missed you." Loneliness settled in my chest as I realized I was the only one who remembered the alternate timelines. The experiences, the friendships, the battles, they were all a part of me now, but I couldn't share them with anyone. Determination took root as I vowed to monitor for any residual temporal anomalies. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not after everything we had been through. The world might be stable now, but there was always a chance that something could go wrong. "You're really back," Lisa said, appearing at my door with a smile. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I admitted, "but I'm glad to be home." "We all are," she said, giving me a reassuring hug. "And we're here for you, whatever happens next." As the days turned into weeks, I adjusted to my new normal. I kept a close eye on the temporal readings, but everything remained stable. My team and I worked tirelessly, ensuring that no further anomalies threatened our world. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, the pendant my alternate self had given me caught the light, casting a soft glow. It was a constant reminder of the journey we'd taken and the allies we'd made along the way. Excitement sparked within me when I detected traces of temporal energy in the city. It was faint, but it was there, a subtle ripple that hinted at lingering instabilities. Curiosity drove me to investigate, leading me to others who retained memories of the loops. We formed a support group, sharing our experiences and supporting each other as we navigated this new reality. Camaraderie warmed my heart as we came together, a group of temporal displacement survivors united by a shared history. We met regularly, discussing our findings and working together to protect our timeline. Anxiety gnawed at me when we noticed subtle shifts in reality, indicating lingering instabilities. It was clear that our work wasn't finished. We had to remain vigilant to ensure that the timelines remained stable. Resolve strengthened as we decided to work together to protect our timeline. We established a covert organization dedicated to monitoring temporal activity and preventing any further disruptions. "We can't let our guard down," I said during one of our meetings. "We've come too far to let everything fall apart now." "We're with you," Lisa said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we'll protect this world." As we expanded our organization, recruiting others with temporal sensitivity, excitement bubbled up within me. We were building something powerful, a network of individuals dedicated to safeguarding the stability of our world. Pride swelled in my chest as we became the unsung heroes, protecting the timeline from unseen threats. We worked tirelessly, our efforts ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. The pendant around my neck was a constant reminder of the journey we had taken and the allies we had made along the way. As I prepared to face whatever the future held, I knew that we were ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. Together, we would forge a path towards a better, more stable future, united by hope and determination. Disorientation overwhelmed me as I materialized in my familiar Seattle apartment. I blinked several times, trying to reconcile the vibrant memories of alternate realities with the mundane sight of my living room. Everything was as I left it, yet it all felt different. "Welcome back," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the lingering vertigo. The room was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. Confusion swirled in my mind as I tried to reconcile my memories with this reality. I walked through the apartment, running my fingers over the furniture, the walls, grounding myself in the familiar. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the stack of books by the sofa, all seemed to whisper that this was home. Relief flooded through me when I confirmed that my loved ones were safe and unaware of the ordeal. I called my parents, my voice trembling as I heard their familiar, comforting voices. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I just wanted to check in." "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to hear your voice," my mom said, her warmth reaching through the phone. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, fighting back tears. "I just missed you." "We missed you too," my dad chimed in. "Come visit soon, okay?" "I will," I promised, hanging up with a sigh of relief. Loneliness settled in my chest as I realized I was the only one who remembered the alternate timelines. The experiences, the friendships, the battles, they were all a part of me now, but I couldn't share them with anyone. It was a burden I had to bear alone. Determination took root as I vowed to monitor for any residual temporal anomalies. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not after everything we had been through. The world might be stable now, but there was always a chance that something could go wrong. "You're really back," Lisa said, appearing at my door with a smile. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I admitted, "but I'm glad to be home." "We all are," she said, giving me a reassuring hug. "And we're here for you, whatever happens next." As the days turned into weeks, I adjusted to my new normal. I kept a close eye on the temporal readings, but everything remained stable. My team and I worked tirelessly, ensuring that no further anomalies threatened our world. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, the pendant my alternate self had given me caught the light, casting a soft glow. It was a constant reminder of the journey we'd taken and the allies we'd made along the way. Excitement sparked within me when I detected traces of temporal energy in the city. It was faint, but it was there, a subtle ripple that hinted at lingering instabilities. "Lisa, I've got something," I said, calling her immediately. "Temporal energy traces downtown." "I'm on it," she replied without hesitation. "Meet you there in 20. Curiosity drove me to investigate, leading me to others who retained memories of the loops. We formed a support group, sharing our experiences and supporting each other as we navigated this new reality. Camaraderie warmed my heart as we came together, a group of temporal displacement survivors united by a shared history. We met regularly, discussing our findings and working together to protect our timeline. "This is amazing," said Jordan, one of the group members. "I thought I was going crazy until I met you all." "You're not alone," I assured him. "We're in this together." Anxiety gnawed at me when we noticed subtle shifts in reality, indicating lingering instabilities. It was clear that our work wasn't finished. We had to remain vigilant to ensure that the timelines remained stable. Resolve strengthened as we decided to work together to protect our timeline. We established a covert organization dedicated to monitoring temporal activity and preventing any further disruptions. "We can't let our guard down," I said during one of our meetings. "We've come too far to let everything fall apart now." "We're with you," Lisa said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we'll protect this world." Our organization, now known as Temporal Stability Watch, TSW, began to grow. We recruited others with temporal sensitivity, people who had experienced the loops and could detect disturbances. Our network expanded, and we became a formidable force, dedicated to safeguarding time itself. "Look at these readings," Jordan said one day, pointing to a series of graphs. "There's a spike in temporal energy near the waterfront." "Let's check it out," I said, gathering our team. "We can't ignore any anomalies, no matter how small." As we investigated the waterfront, the faint glow of temporal energy confirmed our suspicions. We traced the source to an old warehouse, its dilapidated exterior hiding the danger within. "Careful," Lisa warned as we approached. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Inside, we found remnants of the technology used in the experiments. The equipment was damaged, sparking and humming with residual energy. It was a stark reminder of the dangers we faced. "We need to neutralize this," I said, my voice steady despite the tension. "It can't be allowed to destabilize the timeline." Working together, we carefully dismantled the machinery, dispersing the energy safely. It was a meticulous process, but we managed to contain the threat. "Good job, everyone," I said as we finished. "But we have to stay vigilant. There could be more like this out there." As we expanded our organization, recruiting others with temporal sensitivity, excitement bubbled up within me. We were building something powerful, a network of individuals dedicated to safeguarding the stability of our world. "TSW is growing," Lisa said, looking at our new recruits. "We're making a real difference." Pride swelled in my chest as we became the unsung heroes, protecting the timeline from unseen threats. We worked tirelessly, our efforts ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. The pendant around my neck was a constant reminder of the journey we had taken and the allies we had made along the way. As I prepared to face whatever the future held, I knew that we were ready to protect the stability of our world and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way we had. Together, we would forge a path towards a better, more stable future, united by hope and determination. Excitement sparked within me when I detected traces of temporal energy in the city. It had been several months since our last significant discovery, and the readings on my device showed a new anomaly. I immediately called Lisa. "Lisa, I've got something," I said, my voice tinged with urgency. "Temporal energy traces near the old clock tower." "I'm on it," she replied without hesitation. "Meet you there in 20. Curiosity drove me to investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling that this new anomaly was different, more intense than anything we had seen since stabilizing the timelines. The clock tower, abandoned for years, now stood as a silent witness to the disturbances we were tracking. As I arrived, Lisa and Jordan were already there, examining the site with their own devices. Their faces mirrored my excitement and concern. "This is significant," Jordan said, looking up from his readings. "The energy levels are higher than we've seen in months." "Let's be cautious," I said, leading the way into the tower. The air inside was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked under our feet. The faint hum of residual energy was almost palpable. As we explored, we found the source of the disturbance in the basement. Old machinery, similar to what we had dismantled before, hummed with life, its purpose unclear, but undoubtedly dangerous. "How did this get here?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We shut down all known sites." "Someone must have restarted the experiments," I replied, my heart sinking. "We need to figure out who and why." Camaraderie warmed my heart as we came together, a group of temporal displacement survivors united by a shared history. We formed a support group, sharing our experiences and supporting each other as we navigated this new reality. "This is amazing," said Jordan, one of the group members. "I thought I was going crazy until I met you all." "You're not alone," I assured him. "We're in this together." Our group meetings became a lifeline for many, offering a sense of community and understanding that was desperately needed. We discussed our findings and worked together to protect our timeline. Anxiety gnawed at me when we noticed subtle shifts in reality, indicating lingering instabilities. It was clear that our work wasn't finished. We had to remain vigilant to ensure that the timelines remained stable. "These shifts are worrying," Jordan said during one meeting. "If someone is trying to restart the experiments, it could destabilize everything we've worked for." "We need to find out who's behind this," I said, determination hardening my resolve. "And stop them before it's too late." Resolve strengthened as we decided to work together to protect our timeline. We established a covert organization dedicated to monitoring temporal activity and preventing any further disruptions. "We can't let our guard down," I said during one of our meetings. "We've come too far to let everything fall apart now." "We're with you," Lisa said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we'll protect this world." Our organization, now known as Temporal Stability Watch, TSW, began to grow. We recruited others with temporal sensitivity, people who had experienced the loops and could detect disturbances. Our network expanded, and we became a formidable force, dedicated to safeguarding time itself. One evening, as I reviewed the latest data, the pendant my alternate self had given me caught the light, casting a soft glow. It was a constant reminder of the journey we'd taken and the allies we'd made along the way. "Look at these readings," Jordan said one day, pointing to a series of graphs. "There's a spike in temporal energy near the university." "Let's check it out," I said, gathering our team. "We can't ignore any anomalies, no matter how small." As we investigated the university, the faint glow of temporal energy confirmed our suspicions. We traced the source to a hidden lab in the basement, its high-tech equipment humming ominously. "This is sophisticated," Lisa said, examining the machinery. "Someone with serious resources is behind this." "Then we need to find them," I said, my resolve hardening, "and shut this down for good." As we expanded our organization, recruiting others with temporal sensitivity, excitement bubbled up within me. We were building something powerful, a network of individuals dedicated to safeguarding the stability of our world. "TSW is growing," Lisa said, looking at our new recruits. "We're making a real difference." Pride swelled in my chest as we became the unsung heroes, protecting the timeline from unseen threats. We worked tirelessly, our efforts ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. "We need to stay vigilant," I said during one of our meetings. "There's no telling what other threats might be out there." "We're ready," Jordan said, his voice filled with conviction. "Whatever comes our way, we'll handle it together." As the days passed, we continued to monitor temporal activity, our vigilance unwavering. We investigated every anomaly, traced every disturbance, ensuring that the timeline remained stable. Then, one night, an urgent call came through from one of our operatives. "There's a significant disturbance downtown," he said, his voice tense. "We need backup." I grabbed my gear and headed out, adrenaline surging through me. As I arrived at the scene, I saw the familiar faces of my team, their expressions grim but determined. "What are we dealing with?" I asked, scanning the area. "Another hidden lab," Lisa replied. "But this one is more advanced. Whoever is behind this isn't messing around." We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. The lab was hidden beneath an old warehouse, its entrance concealed behind a wall of crates. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint glow of temporal energy. "This is it," I said, my voice steady. "We need to shut this down now." Working together, we dismantled the equipment, carefully dispersing the energy to avoid any disruptions. It was a meticulous process, but we managed to contain the threat. "Good job, everyone," I said as we finished. "But we have to stay vigilant. There could be more like this out there." As we expanded our organization, recruiting others with temporal sensitivity, excitement bubbled up within me. We were building something powerful, a network of individuals dedicated to safeguarding the stability of our world. "TSW is growing," Lisa said, looking at our new recruits. "We're making a real difference." Pride swelled in my chest as we became the unsung heroes, protecting the timeline from unseen threats. We worked tirelessly, our efforts ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. "We need to stay vigilant," I said during one of our meetings. There's no telling what other threats might be out there. We're ready, Jordan said, his voice filled with conviction. Whatever comes our way, we'll handle it together. As the days passed, we continued to monitor temporal activity, our vigilance unwavering. We investigated every anomaly, traced every disturbance, ensuring that the timeline remained stable. Then, one night, an urgent call came through from one of our operatives. "There's a significant disturbance downtown," he said, his voice tense. "We need backup." I grabbed my gear and headed out, adrenaline surging through me. As I arrived at the scene, I saw the familiar faces of my team, their expressions grim but determined. "What are we dealing with?" I asked, scanning the area. "Another hidden lab," Lisa replied. "But this one is more advanced. Whoever is behind this isn't messing around." We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. The lab was hidden beneath an old warehouse, its entrance concealed behind a wall of crates. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint glow of temporal energy. "This is it," I said, my voice steady. "We need to shut this down now." Working together, we dismantled the equipment, carefully dispersing the energy to avoid any disruptions. It was a meticulous process, but we managed to contain the threat. "Good job, everyone," I said as we finished. "But we have to stay vigilant. There could be more like this out there." As we expanded our organization, recruiting others with temporal sensitivity, excitement bubbled up within me. We were building something powerful, a network of individuals dedicated to safeguarding the stability of our world. "TSW is growing," Lisa said, looking at our new recruits. "We're making a real difference." Pride swelled in my chest as we became the unsung heroes, protecting the timeline from unseen threats. We worked tirelessly, our efforts ensuring that no one else would have to endure the suffering we had faced. As I looked around the room, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united by a common goal. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly believed that we could succeed. Together, we would forge a path towards a better, more stable future, united by hope and determination. The soft glow of computer screens illuminated our makeshift headquarters, casting eerie shadows across the faces of my fellow temporal displacement survivors. We had come to call ourselves the Temporal Guardians, a name that felt both grandiose and fitting for the weight of responsibility we carried. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. "Anything new on the scanners, Alex?" Alex, our resident tech genius, shook her head. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she monitored the temporal energy fluctuations across the city. "All quiet on the Western Front, Samantha, but you know as well as I do that could change in an instant." I nodded, a mix of relief and tension coiling in my stomach. It had been 6 months since we established our covert organization to monitor temporal activity. 6 months of constant vigilance, of explaining away our odd behavior to friends and family, of living with the knowledge that we were the thin line between stability and chaos. The silence was broken by the sharp ping of an incoming alert. We all froze, eyes locked on the main screen. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight with anticipation. Alex's brow furrowed as she analyzed the data. "Temporal energy spike in the industrial district. It's unlike anything we've seen before." I leaned in, studying the pulsating red dot on the map. Could it be residual energy from the original experiment? "No," Alex said, shaking her head. "This is new, and it's growing stronger by the minute." My heart raced as I considered the implications. "All right, team, gear up. We need to investigate this immediately." As we prepared to head out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something big. The tension in the air was palpable as we piled into our nondescript van, equipment in tow. The industrial district was eerily quiet as we arrived, the only sound the distant hum of machinery. We followed the signal to an abandoned warehouse, its windows dark and broken. "Remember," I whispered as we approached the entrance, "we don't know what we're walking into. Stay alert and stay together." We entered cautiously, our temporal energy detectors leading the way. The warehouse was filled with rusted machinery and forgotten crates, but at its center stood a sight that made my blood run cold. A makeshift laboratory had been set up, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and glowing monitors. "My God," whispered Mike, our former physicist. "They're trying to recreate the original experiment." Before we could process this revelation, a voice called out from the shadows. "I was wondering when you'd show up." We whirled around to see a man step into the light. He was middle-aged with graying hair and a lab coat. His eyes gleamed with a manic intensity that sent chills down my spine. "Dr. Emerson," I breathed, recognizing him from the files we'd uncovered months ago. "You were part of the original team." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Very good, Samantha. Or should I say Subject 37. I stiffened at the use of my designated number from the experiment. "What are you doing here, Doctor? Don't you realize how dangerous this is?" Dr. Emerson laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the warehouse. "Dangerous? My dear, we are on the brink of the greatest scientific breakthrough in human history, the ability to control time itself. We've seen the consequences of meddling with time," I argued, taking a step forward. "The loops, the displaced people, the fractured realities. It's not worth the cost." "You think too small," he sneered. "With this new experiment, we can perfect the process. No more loops, no more anomalies, just pure, controlled temporal manipulation." Alex spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Your equations are flawed, Doctor. We've analyzed the data. This experiment won't stabilize time. It'll shatter it completely." For a moment, doubt flickered across Dr. Emerson's face, but it was quickly replaced by renewed determination. "You're wrong, and I'll prove it to you all." He lunged for the main control panel, his hand reaching for a large red button. Time seemed to slow as I realized what was about to happen. "No!" I shouted, diving towards him. We collided just as his fingers brushed the button, sending us both crashing to the ground. What followed was a chaotic struggle as my team rushed to secure Dr. Emerson and disable the equipment. Alarms blared, and the air crackled with temporal energy. "Shut it down!" I yelled over the noise. "Shut it all down!" Mike and Alex worked feverishly at the controls while I held Dr. Emerson back. He fought like a man possessed, screaming about lost opportunities and scientific progress. "You don't understand," he cried. "We could reshape the world." I tightened my grip on him. "The world doesn't need reshaping, Doctor. It needs protecting from people like you." After what felt like an eternity, the alarms fell silent, and the hum of energy dissipated. We all stood there, panting and shaken, as the reality of what we'd just prevented sank in. "It's done," Alex said, her voice hoarse. "We've neutralized the equipment and encrypted the data. They won't be able to restart the experiment." Relief washed over me, so powerful it made my knees weak. We had done it. We had stopped another potentially catastrophic time loop before it could begin. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, trusted contacts who knew enough to handle the situation discreetly, I couldn't help but reflect on how close we'd come to disaster. "You've made a terrible mistake," Dr. Emerson said bitterly as we prepared to hand him over. "You've doomed us to a static existence." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Doctor. We've given humanity a chance to make its own future, one day at a time. That's worth more than all the temporal manipulation in the world." As we drove back to our headquarters, exhausted but triumphant, I knew that our work was far from over. There would always be those who sought to control time, to reshape reality to their will. But as long as the temporal guardians existed, we would be there to stop them. "Good work, everyone," I said softly, looking at my team, my friends. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start working on better detection systems. We need to make sure nothing like this ever catches us off guard again." They nodded, determination shining in their eyes despite their fatigue. We were the unsung heroes, the protectors of time itself. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them together. As I fell into bed that night, my mind racing with the events of the day, I allowed myself a small smile. We had chosen a difficult path, but it was the right one. And in the end, that's all that really mattered. The gentle hum of temporal energy monitors filled our underground base, a constant reminder of the invisible burden we carried. I sat at my desk, rubbing my temples, trying to ward off the headache that had become my constant companion. "Samantha?" Alex's voice broke through my thoughts. "You should really get some sleep. You've been at this for 36 hours straight." I looked up, offering a weak smile. I know. It's just, every time I close my eyes, I see timelines fracturing, realities collapsing. How can I sleep knowing what's at stake?" Alex placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "That's exactly why you need to rest. We can't protect time if we're running on empty." I nodded, knowing she was right. As I stood to leave, an alert pinged on my wrist device. Another temporal anomaly detected, another potential crisis to avert. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. "I'll handle this one," Mike said, emerging from the monitoring room. "You get some rest, Sam. That's an order." I chuckled weakly. "Since when do you give the orders around here?" "Since our fearless leader started looking like she might collapse at any moment," he retorted with a grin. As I made my way to the small room we'd set up for power naps, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were fighting a losing battle. For every temporal incursion we stopped, 2 more seemed to pop up. The constant vigilance was taking its toll on all of us. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of shattered timelines and faces of those we couldn't save. I woke feeling more drained than when I'd laid down. Returning to the main room, I found the team gathered around a holographic display, expressions grim. "What's going on?" I asked, immediately on alert. Dr. Eliza Chen, our resident physicist, looked up with worry etched on her face. "We've detected a pattern in the temporal disturbances. They're increasing in frequency and intensity. If this continues, the fabric of time itself could unravel," I finished, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. The room fell silent as we all grappled with the enormity of the situation. It was Alex who finally broke the tension. "We need a new approach," she said, determination glinting in her eyes. "We can't keep playing whack-a-mole with these incursions. We need to be proactive." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "You're right. What do you have in mind?" Over the next few hours, we brainstormed, argued, and ultimately came up with a plan. We would develop technology to not just detect temporal incursions, but to prevent them before they could occur. The work was grueling, pushing the boundaries of our understanding of temporal mechanics. Days blurred into weeks as we poured every ounce of our knowledge and energy into the project. Finally, after countless setbacks and near failures, we had a prototype. "All right, team," I said, standing before the device that represented our hopes. "This is it. If this works, we'll be able to stabilize the temporal field around the entire city." "And if it doesn't?" Mike asked, voicing the fear we all felt. I met his gaze steadily. "Then we keep trying until we get it right. Failure isn't an option." With bated breath, we activated the device. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the temporal energy readings began to stabilize. "It's working," Dr. Chen whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. "My God, it's actually working." The celebration that followed was tempered by the knowledge that our work was far from over. We had protected one city, but the world was vast, and time was fragile everywhere. In the months that followed, we expanded our operations, reaching out to others with temporal sensitivity across the globe. It wasn't easy convincing people of the reality of our situation, but those who had experienced the time loops or felt the tremors in the fabric of reality were quick to join our cause. I stood before a group of new recruits, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. "What we do isn't glamorous," I told them. "There are no medals, no public accolades. Most of the world will never know the dangers we avert every day. But make no mistake, The work we do here is vital. We are the guardians of time itself, the last line of defense against chaos. As our organization grew, so did the challenges we faced. Rogue scientists attempting to manipulate time for personal gain, corporations seeking to exploit temporal energy, even well-meaning individuals whose actions threatened the stability of our timeline. Each victory came at a cost. The constant vigilance wore on us all, the weight of our responsibility a constant presence. One evening I found Mike staring out the window of our base, his expression troubled. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked, joining him. He sighed heavily. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing, Sam? Playing God with time like this?" I considered his words carefully before responding. "We're not playing God, Mike. We're preserving the natural order. Time was never meant to be manipulated or controlled. We're just the immune system of reality, fighting off threats to its integrity." He nodded slowly, though I could see the conflict still raging behind his eyes. "I hope you're right, because if we're wrong, we can't afford to think that way," I said firmly. "Doubt is a luxury we can't afford in our line of work." As if to punctuate my words, an alert sounded from the main room. We rushed in to find Alex already at her station, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "We've got a massive temporal disturbance forming in the South Pacific," she reported, her voice tense. "It's like nothing we've ever seen before." I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked at the readings. This was what we had been preparing for, the ultimate test of our abilities and resolve. "Alert all stations," I commanded, slipping into leadership mode. "I want every available agent mobilized and ready for deployment in 1 hour." As the base erupted into a flurry of activity, I took a moment to center myself. The fate of our timeline, perhaps all timelines, hung in the balance. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but I refused to buckle under it. I caught my reflection in a darkened monitor screen, noting the determination in my eyes. We had come so far since that first, fateful phone call that started it all. We had faced impossible odds, made sacrifices, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever this new threat was, we would face it head on. Because that's what we did. We were the temporal guardians, the unsung heroes protecting the stability of our world. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would stand firm. As I prepared to lead my team into our greatest battle yet, I allowed myself a small smile. The road ahead would be difficult, but we had each other. And in the end, that might just be enough to save time itself. The soft glow of the setting sun painted the Seattle skyline in hues of gold and pink, a stark contrast to the tension that filled our temporal guardians' headquarters. I stood by the window, lost in thought, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. "Penny for your thoughts, Sam." Alex's voice broke through my reverie. I turned to face her, a small smile playing on my lips. "Just thinking about how far we've come. Remember when our biggest concern was convincing people we weren't crazy?" Alex chuckled, the sound tinged with nostalgia. "Feels like a lifetime ago. Hard to believe it's only been 3 years since that first phone call. 3 years, 12 alternate timelines, and more close calls than I care to count," I added, my tone becoming more serious. "We've done good work, Alex. Saved a lot of people, protected the integrity of time itself." She nodded, her expression mirroring my own mix of pride and weariness. "We have. But sometimes I wonder, at what cost?" I knew what she meant. The constant vigilance, the sacrifices we'd all made, the weight of responsibility that never seemed to lighten. Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the facility, causing us both to jump. "What now?" I muttered, rushing to the control room with Alex hot on my heels. Mike was already there, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. "We've got a massive temporal disturbance forming," he reported, his voice tense. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." I leaned in, studying the readings with growing alarm. The energy signature was off the charts, pulsating with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Location? I asked, already dreading the answer. Mike's voice was barely above a whisper. Everywhere. It's not localized. This disturbance is affecting the entire temporal field. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Everything we'd worked for, all the safeguards we'd put in place, might not be enough to stop this. Alert all stations, I commanded, slipping into leadership mode, despite the fear threatening to overwhelm me. I want every available agent mobilized. We need to coordinate a global response. As the room erupted into a flurry of activity, I felt a familiar sensation wash over me. It was the same feeling I'd had when I first answered that fateful phone call, hearing my own voice pleading for help. The beginning of it all. Hours passed in a blur of frantic calculations, emergency communications, and desperate attempts to stabilize the temporal field. But despite our best efforts, the disturbance continued to grow. "It's no use," Dr. Chen said, her voice laced with defeat. "Our equipment can't handle this level of temporal flux. We're looking at a complete breakdown of the space-time continuum." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Everything we'd fought for, all the lives we'd saved, could be undone in an instant. "There has to be something we can do," I insisted, refusing to accept defeat. "We've come too far to fail now." As if in response to my words, a shrill ringing cut through the tension. It was coming from my personal phone, the one I kept for emergencies. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered the call. "Hello? Sam? It's me. Well, us. Listen carefully. We don't have much time." I froze, recognizing my own voice on the other end of the line. But it wasn't just my voice, it was a chorus of my voice overlapping and echoing as if multiple versions of me were speaking at once. "What's going on?" I asked, putting the call on speaker so the others could hear. "We're you, from multiple timelines," the voices explained. "The disturbance you're experiencing is the result of all timelines converging. It's not a breakdown, it's a reset." My mind reeled as I tried to process this information. "A reset? What does that mean?" "It means a chance to fix everything," the voices continued. "All the mistakes, all the unintended consequences of our actions. But it has to be done right. That's why we're contacting you." For the next few minutes, my other selves explained the situation in greater detail. The convergence was a natural correction, a way for the universe to heal the damage done by temporal manipulation. But it needed to be guided, shaped by someone who understood the intricacies of time. "You mean me," I said, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders once more. "Us," the voices corrected. "All versions of us, working together across timelines. But you're the linchpin, the version that can make it all work." As they laid out the plan, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. It was dangerous, with no guarantee of success, but it was also our only chance. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, determination replacing fear in my voice. The instructions were complex, involving precise calculations and split-second timing. As I relayed the information to my team, I could see the spark of hope rekindling in their eyes. "This is insane," Mike said, shaking his head in disbelief. "But I guess insane is our specialty, right?" I managed a small smile. It's certainly never boring around here. As we prepared for what could be our final mission, I took a moment to address my team, my friends, my family, and all but blood. "I know I'm asking a lot," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "What we're about to do is dangerous and uncertain, but I want you to know, no matter what happens, it has been an honor to work with each and every one of you. We've faced the impossible before, and we've always come out on top. Let's do it one more time." The room erupted in determined cheers, the energy palpable as we set our plan into motion. The next few hours were a blur of activity. We coordinated with our counterparts in other timelines, each of us playing our part in this cosmic symphony. As the moment of convergence approached, I could feel the very air around us humming with temporal energy. "It's time," I said, my hand hovering over the final control. With a deep breath, I activated the sequence. The world around us seemed to shimmer and twist, reality itself bending as the timelines began to merge. I closed my eyes, memories flooding through me, not just my own, but those of countless other versions of myself. I saw alternate paths, different choices, lives lived and lost across the multiverse. And then, suddenly everything stopped. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in a familiar place, my apartment, where it had all begun. But it felt different somehow, more real than it had ever been before. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. With a sense of déjà vu, I answered. "Hello? Sam, it's me. Well, us. We did it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "We did? Is it over?" "Not over," the voices replied. "Just reset. We've been given a second chance, a clean slate. What happens now is up to you." As the call ended, I walked to my window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. It looked the same, and yet I knew everything had changed. The weight of knowledge and responsibility still rested on my shoulders, but now it was tempered with hope. We had faced the greatest threat to time itself and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them with the same determination and courage that had brought us this far. A new chapter was beginning, not just for me, but for all of reality. And as I stood there, watching the sun rise on this new day, I couldn't help but smile. The adventure was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning.